Settle in, pull the blanket a little tighter. Wherever you are right now, whatever the world asked of you today, you can set it all down for a while. We are going somewhere cold and ancient, somewhere where the mountains scrape the belly of the clouds and the wind carries the echoes of a 1,000-year-old war. We are going back to Skyrim. And tonight, we are going deep. Not just the surface stuff, not the quests you stumbled into at level 5 or the dragons you fought on the road to Whiterun. Tonight we are going into the bones of the world, into the philosophy locked inside the lore, into the developer secrets buried in the code, and into the stories that the game never quite tells you directly, but hides in the margins of old books and the behavior of NPCs who have been waiting, quietly, for someone to notice them. 130 facts. Some will surprise you. Some will change the way you remember the game entirely. Some are strange enough that you will want to go back and look for yourself. And all of them are worth sitting with in the quiet of the night. So, find a comfortable position, let your breathing slow down, and let us begin. Section 1. The World Before the World. Nordic Cosmology and the Architecture of Reality. Before we can talk about Skyrim, we have to talk about the sky itself, and the stars. Because in the Elder Scrolls universe, the stars are not what you think they are. To the people of Tamriel, and specifically to those who follow Nordic cosmological tradition, the night sky is not a canopy of distant suns burning millions of miles away. It is something far stranger and far more intimate than that. According to the oldest Nordic understanding of the universe, the stars are holes, tiny punctures torn in the fabric of Mundus, which is the name for the mortal world, the physical plane of existence that you and every character in Skyrim inhabits. Small gaps ripped through the skin of reality itself. And the sun, that great blazing disk that rises over the mountains of Skyrim each morning and casts long gold light across the tundra, is the largest hole of all. Here is why those holes exist, and the answer is genuinely one of the most unsettling creation myths in any fictional universe. In the earliest days, a group of divine beings, the Aedra, chose to participate in the creation of Mundus. They poured their essence into building the mortal world, shaping the land and the sea and the laws of physics. And as they worked, they realized something horrifying. The act of creation was draining them. Staying inside Mundus, being part of it, was slowly making them less divine, pulling their godhood out of them and converting it into the world itself. They were bleeding themselves dry just by existing inside what they had made. So they left. The ones who could, the ones who retained enough of their power to escape, tore through the fabric of Mundus and fled back to Aetherius, the divine realm beyond the mortal world. And the holes they left behind, those tears in the skin of reality, are what we see when we look up at the night sky. Every star is an exit wound, a place where a god once was and chose not to remain. And the light that bleeds through those holes is not simply photons traveling through space. It is magical energy, raw, divine essence from Aetherius leaking through the gaps in the world into Mundus. This is where magicka comes from. Every spell a mage casts in Skyrim, every shock of lightning, every flame, every healing ward, is powered by divine energy that seeps through the holes left by gods who abandoned the world at the moment of its birth. Think about that the next time you look up at the night sky in the game. You are staring at a graveyard of departed deities. Now let us go one layer deeper, because the sun is not simply the biggest hole in the sky. The sun has a specific identity in Elder Scrolls cosmology. The sun is Magnus, not the light of Magnus, not a gift from Magnus. The sun is the hole that Magnus himself left when he was the first to flee the construction of Mundus. According to the lore, Magnus was the architect of magic, the being who designed the rules governing how magical energy would work in the mortal world. When he realized what creation was costing him, he tore a massive rift and escaped back to Aetherius, leaving behind the biggest hole of all, the sun, his exit. This is why the Staff of Magnus, found in Skyrim's College of Winterhold questline, is so cosmically significant. It is not just a powerful weapon. It is literally a tool that belonged to the architect of magic itself, the being whose departure created the sun. In the right hands, with the right knowledge, it could potentially rewrite how magic functions in the entire world. The Thalmor were after it during the college questline for exactly this reason. Now let us talk about Mundus itself, because the mortal world is a stranger place than it first appears. Mundus is not the whole universe. It is a small, compromised pocket of existence that was built by the Aedra and cost them enormously to maintain. The plane is surrounded by the void, oblivion, and the various realms of the Daedric princes exist in the spaces between. Each one a pocket dimension shaped entirely by the personality and will of the prince who rules it. And Nirn, the actual planet that Skyrim sits on, is orbited by 2 moons, Massor and Secunda. In Nordic and imperial religion, these moons have their own theological significance. Some traditions teach that the moons are the dead body and torn skin of Lorcan, the trickster god who convinced the Aedra to create Mundus in the first place and was killed for it. His heart was torn out and thrown down to become the Red Mountain in Morrowind, the very volcano that the Dwemer later discovered and tried to exploit. There is a thread connecting the moons in the sky to the disaster that erased the Dwemer, and it runs through the body of a dead god buried in a volcano. The Khajiit have an entirely different relationship with the moons. Their society, their bodies, even which subspecies of Khajiit a person is born as, are all determined by the phase of Massor and Secunda at the moment of birth. A Khajiit born under a full moon will be a large, powerful Cathay Rot. One born when both moons are dark becomes a small, nimble Suthe. And at the extremes, the rarest and most unusual Khajiit subspecies only appear when the moons align in the rarest possible configurations. The moons do not just light the night sky for the Khajiit. The moons literally determine what kind of person they will be. Their entire biological identity is written in the heavens. This is also why the Thalmor's interference with the moons during the Oblivion Crisis, the period when the moons went dark for a time known as the Void Nights, was such a catastrophic act of cultural violence against the Khajiit people. An entire generation of Khajiit were born without the moon's guidance during those years. The consequences to their culture and their biology were severe and long-lasting. And then, when the Thalmor claimed credit for restoring the moons, the Khajiit were forced into a position of humiliating gratitude toward the people who had arguably caused the problem. The political implications of that are still echoing through Elsewhere and beyond by the time Skyrim takes place. Let us come back to Skyrim itself, specifically to the province's place in the mortal world. Skyrim is the northernmost human-inhabited province of Tamriel. Its northern coast faces the Sea of Ghosts. To the east sits Morrowind, to the south, Cyrodiil. And Skyrim's relationship with the cold is not simply a geographical accident. The cold in Skyrim is, in some places, literal magic. Ancient, residual magic that has soaked into the land over thousands of years of catastrophic events. The permafrost at the top of the throat of the world, the highest peak in Skyrim, never melts. Not because the altitude keeps it cold, though it does, but because that specific snow is enchanted. It carries magical properties so dense that it resists temperature entirely. The snow at the very summit exists in a kind of permanent magical stasis. And the White Phial, one of Skyrim's legendary alchemical artifacts, was crafted from the ice at that peak precisely because of those enchanted properties. The alchemist who made it filled it with the meltwater, or rather the non-meltwater, and created a container that could amplify and purify any liquid placed inside it. A powerful tool built from a magical geography that most people never think to question. Skyrim's mountains themselves were shaped by centuries of events, so dramatic that they left permanent marks on the landscape. The throat of the world, the central pillar of Skyrim's geography, is not just tall, it is a temporal anomaly. We will come back to that in detail later, but know for now that time literally functions differently at that summit. Past, present, and future brush against each other there in ways they do not anywhere else in the mortal world because of something that was done there thousands of years ago by desperate people who had no other options. And beneath all of it, beneath the mountains and the tundra and the buried ruins of civilizations that rose and fell long before any living person was born, is a darkness that goes deeper than stone. A darkness that connects to things older than recorded history. Black reaches down there, the soul cairn echoes from somewhere. The world of Skyrim has layers the game barely hints at, and the hints it does give are genuinely staggering. The Argonians have one of the most unusual biological connections to their environment of any race in Tamriel. Their relationship with the Hist trees is not simply spiritual or cultural, it is biological in the most literal sense. Argonian eggs will not survive in their hatching pools without exposure to Hist sap. Young Argonians must lick sap from a Hist tree before they develop fully. The trees are not sacred to Argonians in the way that a church is sacred to its congregation. They are necessary in the way that oxygen is necessary. The Hist are ancient beings, possibly predating most of Tamriel's other intelligent life, and they communicate with Argonians through dreams and visions, guiding the species in ways that outsiders struggle to comprehend or observe. During conflicts in Tamriel's Second Era, the practical consequences of this dependency became devastatingly clear. Separating Argonian populations from Hist trees does not just cause cultural dislocation, it causes biological crisis. It affects reproduction. It affects development. The Hist and the Argonians are intertwined in ways that make the Argonian relationship with their homeland one of the most deeply physical of any culture's homeland connection in the lore. Before we go any further into the night, drop a comment and tell me where you are in the world right now and what time it is. Whether you are in bed at 2 in the morning with a restless mind, or you have headphones on during a long shift somewhere, or you are just winding down from a difficult week, I love hearing where these videos find you. And if this is the kind of thing that helps you drift off and settle, please subscribe. It means more than you probably know, and it helps more people find their way here. Section 2. The Dragon Civilization. Reality as language. The dragons of Skyrim are not simply large flying lizards that breathe fire. That description is accurate, in the same way that saying the ocean is some water is technically true, but absurdly insufficient. The dragons are something far older and far stranger than the game's combat encounters suggest, and understanding what they actually are changes everything about how the world of Skyrim works. Let us start with the dragon language, because this is the foundation. Dovazul, the tongue of dragons, is not a communication system. It is not a language in the way that English or Nordic or any mortal tongue is a language. It is the fundamental code of reality itself. When a dragon speaks in Dovazul, it is not describing a concept, it is actualizing it. The word for fire, spoken in the true dragon tongue, does not represent fire. It is not a symbol pointing toward fire as an abstraction. The word is fire. Speaking it correctly, with the full weight of draconic vocal power behind it, brings fire into existence through the act of utterance alone. This is why the thu'um, the shout system that the Dragonborn uses, is so profoundly powerful. You are not casting a spell when you shout. You are speaking the fabric of reality into a new configuration. When you use Fusroda, the unrelenting force shout, you are speaking 3 words that mean force, balance, and push. You are not summoning a magical effect. You are commanding reality to rearrange itself in accordance with what you have said. The force comes into being because you told the universe that it must. This distinction matters enormously when you think about the Greybeards. The 5 masters who dwell at High Hrothgar, who have spent decades, or in some cases centuries, in near total silence, are not being silent because they are eccentric or antisocial. They are being silent because the alternative is catastrophic. When a greybeard of their caliber speaks in Dovazul, even casually, even accidentally, they reshape reality. A greeting could shatter stone. A passing comment could trigger an avalanche. Even the ordinary rhythms of conversation, spoken in the dragon tongue by someone with their level of mastery, would cause continuous, uncontrolled destruction. Arngir, the greybeard who speaks to the Dragonborn in plain language, is performing an act of deliberate restraint and significant cost whenever he chooses to communicate. He speaks in the ordinary mortal tongue specifically to avoid the collateral damage of using his actual voice. This is described as a mercy and an accommodation. He is making himself smaller than he is so that the person he is talking to survives the conversation. Consider what it means then when the Greybeards summon the Dragonborn. The shout they use to call the last Dragonborn to High Hrothgar is heard across the entire province of Skyrim simultaneously. Guards in Solitude hear it, citizens in Riften feel it, the mountains shake. NPCs across the map comment on it with varying degrees of awe. And this, according to the lore, is the Greybeards operating at the absolute minimum of their capability, the softest possible whisper of their true power. They are barely trying, and it shakes a mountain range. Dragonborn, the word they shout, the summoning itself, creates a visible and physical effect in the world. That is their restrained version of speaking. Their full voice, unleashed without discipline, would do things the game never depicts, because depicting it would require showing the complete unmaking of the surrounding landscape. Now let us talk about Alduin, because he is at the center of all of this. Alduin is referred to throughout Skyrim as the firstborn of Akatosh, the dragon god of time, and many of the Nordic people make the mistake of treating Alduin and Akatosh as the same being. This is wrong. It is a theological error with significant implications. Akatosh is a divine principle, a concept of time and continuity, and beginning given a name and worshipped as a god. Alduin is his firstborn creation, the first dragon, the first expression of the time deity's creative power. Being the firstborn of a god does not make you that god, any more than being someone's child makes you the person who raised you. Alduin is ancient beyond reckoning. He predates linear time. He was created before the calendar of the universe began to tick forward. But he is not Akatosh. He is something Akatosh made. And what was Alduin made for? This is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Alduin's cosmic function, the purpose for which he was created, and the role he is supposed to fulfill at the end of every age, is to consume the world, not to conquer it, not to rule it, to eat it, to devour the current kalpa, the current cycle of existence, so that a new one can begin. Alduin is the reset button for the universe. He is destruction in service of renewal, the consuming fire that clears the way for new creation. The catastrophic thing that happened, the thing that Skyrim's entire main quest is built around, is not simply that Alduin came back. It is that Alduin decided he did not want to fulfill his cosmic function. He wanted to rule instead of destroy. He wanted to be a god king over the mortals of Tamriel, rather than consume them and make way for the next cycle. He abandoned his divine purpose and substituted a personal ambition in its place. And in doing so, he broke something fundamental about the structure of the universe. Every dragon that serves Alduin is therefore participating in a cosmic rebellion against the nature of reality itself. They are not just enemies in a video game. They are instruments of divine dysfunction, beings whose existence in their current role represents a corruption of the universal order. Paarthurnax, the ancient dragon who sits atop the throat of the world and leads the Greybeards, is the single most philosophically interesting character in the game. His name, in Dovazul, means ambition, overlord, cruelty. That is the name he was given at his creation, and it is an accurate description of what he was. During the Dragon War, the war that preceded the game's events by thousands of years, Paarthurnax served as Alduin's most trusted lieutenant, his right hand, the second most powerful dragon in the world, operating in direct service of a being who was enslaving and consuming humanity. By his own admission, Paarthurnax committed atrocities against mortal people during that period. The game does not show them. It does not need to. He tells you himself, calmly and without self-pity, that what he did was terrible, and that he has spent thousands of years trying to become something different. Here is what changed him. Paarthurnax was the first dragon to question whether Alduin's claims of godhood were actually true. He decided, on his own, through internal philosophical examination, that the hierarchy of power that dragons enforced was not divinely ordained. It was not cosmic truth. It was simply force. Might presenting itself as righteousness, and he rejected it. He defected. He went to the humans who were trying to survive under dragon domination, and he did something unprecedented. He taught them the thu'um. Think about what it took to do that. Paarthurnax did not just switch sides in a war. He committed the ultimate philosophical rebellion against the foundational ideology of his entire species. For a dragon, power is not just desirable, it is the definition of truth. To reject the idea that draconic supremacy was divinely justified, Paarthurnax had to look at the core premise of everything he had ever been told about the nature of existence and declare it false. He did this alone, from the inside, while still surrounded by beings who believed the opposite with absolute conviction. What he gave humanity was more than a weapon. It was a moral framework. The ability to fight dragons in the thu'um meant humans could resist physically. But Paarthurnax's defection meant they could resist philosophically. Because now, one of the dragons themselves had stood up and said, "We do not deserve to rule you. Our power is real, but it is not righteousness, it is just power, and power can be challenged." This is why the Blade's demand that you kill Paarthurnax is so agonizing from a moral standpoint. He has spent somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 years making himself into something different from what he was. Sitting alone at the top of a mountain, meditating, fighting his own instincts every single day, trying to understand what it means to choose ethics over nature. And the Blades want to kill him not for what he has done, but for what he is. They are proposing a kind of punishment for biology. For being born a dragon, Paarthurnax knows this argument. He presents it to you himself, calmly, when you confront him about it. He does not deny what he once was, he simply asks what he is now, and whether the now matters. The game does not tell you what the right answer is. It genuinely does not know. That is one of the things that makes Skyrim, at its best, a philosophically serious work of fiction. The three ancient heroes who used the Elder Scroll to banish Alduin, Gormlaith Goldenhilt, Hakon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old, were the first humans ever to master the thu'um through Paarthurnax's teaching. They were the prototypes, the proof of concept that it could be done, and their solution to Alduin was not to kill him, because even then, that was understood to be essentially impossible. They displaced him. They used an Elder Scroll, one of the most powerful artifacts in the universe, to push Alduin sideways through time, sending him forward into a future moment when someone would be capable of dealing with him permanently. That someone is the Dragonborn. And the place where that happened, the exact spot where three desperate humans broke linear time with an artifact of divine power, is the summit of the throat of the world. This is why that place is cosmically significant. This is why time flows strangely there. This is why the Elder Scroll used in the ritual is still accessible at that summit thousands of years later, waiting patiently in its case for someone to pick it up and read the temporal wound backwards. The mountain did not become sacred because it was tall. It became sacred because the most significant act in the history of Nordic civilization happened at its peak. There is one more dragon worth discussing in this section, and his name is Volthuriol. He is one of Skyrim's most surprising secrets. Deep inside Blackreach, the vast underground Dwemer cavern beneath the mountains, there is a massive false sun, an orb of blazing light hanging at the center of the cavern's ceiling. If you use the unrelenting force shout on this orb, a dragon named Volthuriol will drop from the heights and attack you. No one fully explains why a dragon is living inside an underground cavern. The game does not address it directly, but the lore implications are fascinating. Volthuriol has apparently been down there, in the dark, for as long as the Dwemer ruins have been empty. More than 1,000 years. A dragon, a creature built to soar through the sky and command the wind, voluntarily or involuntarily sealed into one of the deepest, darkest places in the world. What does that mean for a being whose nature is dominance over open sky? What kind of creature does 1,000 years of underground existence make of a dragon? These are questions the game leaves entirely open. Section 3. The Dwemer. Engineers at the edge of divinity. There is a particular kind of sadness that attaches itself to the Dwemer ruins scattered across Skyrim. You walk into one of those ancient stone corridors, past the grinding mechanical guardians that still patrol their posts after more than 1,000 years, and you feel the weight of a civilization that reached further than any other in recorded history, and then vanished in a single instant, leaving behind only their machines, their buildings, and an absence so complete that nobody even agrees on what exactly happened. The Dwemer, known to most people as the dwarves, were not actually dwarves in any traditional sense of the word. They were elves. Mer, specifically, a sub-race of the Aldmer who diverged early in the Merethic Era and developed a culture so radically different from other elven civilizations that they became nearly unrecognizable as related. They lived underground not because they were small or afraid of sunlight, but because they chose it. Because the deep places of the world were where their work could be done without interruption. And their work was something that has no precise parallel in any other civilization in Tamriel's history. They called it tonal architecture. The principle, stated simply, is that reality is fundamentally musical in nature. Existence itself is composed of vibrations and frequencies. Matter, energy, thought, the laws of physics, all of these are ultimately tones, resonances playing against each other in specific mathematical relationships. If you can identify the frequencies, if you can calculate the precise tones that underlie a given aspect of reality, you can alter it. You can reshape matter, generate energy, create effects that look like magic but are actually something closer to advanced physics conducted through sound. The Dwemer developed this understanding to a degree that no other civilization has approached before or since. Their tonal architects could bend weaker minds to their will through complex aural hypnosis. Their resonators could fill entire caverns with pipes and pistons and dials, machinery running on harmonics rather than fuel. Their automatons, the centurions and spheres and spiders that still patrol their ruins, are not powered by any conventional energy source. They are sustained by carefully calculated resonant frequencies built into their construction, tones embedded so precisely into their metal that the machines maintain themselves indefinitely, carrying their functions forward through pure harmonic self-perpetuation. This is why the Dwemer machinery still works, not because it is incredibly well built in a conventional mechanical sense, though it is that too, but because it is not quite machinery in the ordinary meaning of the word. It is closer to a note of music held perfectly, indefinitely, across 1,000 years. Paarthurnax was the chief tonal architect of the Dwemer people, the most gifted practitioner of their most sacred discipline, and he had an idea that was, depending on your perspective, either the most ambitious thing anyone has ever attempted or a staggering act of hubris. He wanted to make his people gods. Not metaphorically, not in the sense of raising them to a higher level of consciousness or expanding their philosophical understanding of divinity, literally. He wanted to engineer the transformation of the entire Dwemer race into divine beings through the application of tonal architecture to a power source capable of achieving it. The power source he found was the heart of Lorkhan. Deep beneath Red Mountain, in what is now Morrowind, Dwemer miners broke through into a chamber containing something that defied explanation. An artifact of divine origin, the literal heart of the dead god Lorkhan, the trickster deity who had convinced the other Aedra to create Mundus and been killed for it. His heart had been torn from his chest, thrown into the world, and had landed in Red Mountain where it sat, still beating with impossible divine energy, waiting. Paarthurnax wrote a book called Divine Metaphysics, which is one of the most extraordinary texts in Tamrielic history. In it, he treats divinity not as a spiritual truth or a religious mystery, but as a technical problem to be solved. He approaches godhood the way an engineer approaches a structural challenge. What are the components? What are the forces at work? What tools are needed to achieve the desired outcome? The book lays out his plan for connecting the entire Dwemer race to the heart of Lorkhan through tonal architecture and using that divine power to elevate them collectively to godhood. He built 3 tools to accomplish this: Keening, Sunder, and Hrothgar, each one designed to interact with the heart in a precise and controlled way, channeling its power through the tonal architecture he had designed. In 1E700, at the Battle of Red Mountain, with the Dwemer and the Chimer fighting a war that had been building for generations, Paarthurnax made his move. He struck the heart of Lorkhan with his tools, and at the exact moment he did, every Dwemer in the world, across every city and ruin, and outpost and settlement in Tamriel, vanished, simultaneously, in the blink of an eye. In the Dwemer city of Bams Amshend in Mournhold, investigators later found piles of ash in chairs and beds, and beside weapons that had been dropped mid-use. The Dwemer did not flee. They did not transform slowly over time. They were simply removed from existence in a single instant, their bodies disintegrating where they stood, while their machinery continued operating without them. The Guardians kept patrolling. The resonators kept humming. The city went on running as if its inhabitants were just in another room. What happened to them? The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain, and this is one of the most genuinely open mysteries in the entire Elder Scrolls universe. Some scholars believe they were incorporated into Numidium, the massive mechanical god that Paarthurnax was trying to create, literally becoming the animating essence of the brass deity. Others believe the tonal miscalibration of striking the heart scattered them across time, spread across different eras simultaneously. Others believe they were simply erased from existence entirely, unmade as thoroughly as they had hoped to unmake the barriers between mortality and divinity. The theories conflict, and none of them have been definitively proven. There is exactly one Dwemer who survived, Jurgen Windcaller. At the time of the disappearance, he was traveling in an outer realm, a dimension outside of Mundus, and therefore outside the reach of whatever happened when Paarthurnax struck the heart. He returned to find his entire civilization gone. Every single member of his race, every person he had ever known, simply absent from the universe. He spent years searching, unable to find a single other living Dwemer, and eventually contracted Corporus disease, which swelled his body so severely that he required a modified Dwemer Centurion spider fitted to the lower half of his form just to move around. By the time a player encounters him in Morrowind, centuries later, he is a broken, bloated thing, sustained by tonal energies that should not still be working, the last of his kind, unable to tell you what happened because he was not there to see it. The tragedy of the Dwemer is the tragedy of certainty. They were so convinced of their own capacity, so assured that they had calculated everything correctly, that they never genuinely considered the possibility that they were wrong. They treated divinity as a technical problem and forgot that there might be variables they could not account for. And so, the smartest civilization in recorded history made themselves disappear, leaving behind only machines that do not know their makers are gone. Blackreach is the most direct way to understand what the Dwemer built. This underground cavern, accessible beneath the mountains of Skyrim, is described as geologically impossible. A space this large should not exist at the depth where it sits. The Dwemer either found a natural formation and expanded it beyond anything nature intended, or they created the entire space through tonal architecture, simply telling the stone that it was not there. The artificial sun hanging at the cavern's ceiling, the glowing mushrooms that exist nowhere else in Tamriel, the vast city that still stands in the cavern's depths, all of this represents Dwemer engineering at a scale that modern civilization cannot replicate. The glowing mushrooms of Blackreach are worth a specific mention. They are not native Tamrielic flora. They exist nowhere else in the known world. The leading theory is that they are a species cultivated or even created by the Dwemer, specifically for the cavern, engineered organisms serving as a living lighting system in a space where sunlight could not reach. If true, that means the Dwemer were not only engineers of stone and metal and sound, but also of biology itself, capable of designing organisms to serve specific functional purposes. There is a coda to the Dwemer story that takes place in Skyrim itself. Arniel Gain, a researcher at the College of Winterhold, became obsessed with understanding what had happened to the Dwemer. He obtained Keening, one of Paarthurnax's 3 tools, and using a substitute for the Heart of Lorkhan, a charged soul gem, attempted to recreate the circumstances of the disappearance in controlled conditions. The result was instantaneous and total. Arniel Gain vanished, exactly as the Dwemer had vanished, in a blink, without leaving any trace of himself behind. His experiment proved, definitively, that Paarthurnax's use of his tools had indeed caused the disappearance. It also meant that Arniel had become a casualty of his own research, demonstrating a principle that the College of Winterhold seems to have to relearn in every generation. Some questions are answered at a cost that is not worth paying. His shade occasionally appears afterward, a shimmering ghost of himself, still present in some liminal state between existence and absence, to help the Dragonborn in specific situations. Whether this is the real Arniel or a magical echo of him, and whether whatever it is knows what it is, the game does not say. The lexicon that Septimus Cygnus studies in his icy outpost north of Winterhold is a Dwemer device of a different kind. The lexicon does not store information the way a book stores it, as marks on a page that a reader decodes. It imprints information directly into the mind of whoever transcribes it. Completing his questline and transcribing the runed lexicon grants the Ancient Knowledge perk permanently. The perk improves smithing skill and provides armor bonuses when wearing Dwemer equipment, representing fragments of engineering understanding absorbed from the device. The Dwemer achieved direct knowledge transfer, the ability to copy expertise from one mind to another without the mediation of language or instruction. If this technology had survived and been properly understood, it would have completely transformed how knowledge was preserved and transmitted in Tamriel. Instead, one damaged lexicon and one obsessed hermit are all that remain of this innovation. Section 4. The Snow Elves and the Long Fall of a Civilization. There are 2 surviving Snow Elves in Skyrim, too. Out of an entire civilization that once spanned the whole of the Skyrim province, a sophisticated and ancient people who built in the sunlight and who had developed a culture of significant elegance and accomplishment. By the time the Dragonborn is walking around, that entire civilization has been reduced to 2 people and a population of blind, feral, barely recognizable descendants who attack on sight. How does an entire civilization fall that completely? The answer is one of the longest and most painful stories in the Elder Scrolls universe, and it runs through betrayal at nearly every step. In the Merethic Era, long before the game's events, before the Nordic people even existed in Skyrim, the Snow Elves were the primary inhabitants of the province. They called themselves the Falmer, and they were, by all accounts, a prosperous and accomplished people. They lived in sunlight. They had cities, theology, art, and a sophisticated social structure. The Chantry of Auriel, the sacred space hidden in the Forgotten Vale and discovered in the Dawnguard DLC, gives you a glimpse of what their architecture looked like at its height. It is genuinely beautiful. Frozen waterfalls and ancient stonework and spaces designed to capture and refract light in particular ways. A civilization with aesthetic ambition and the skill to realize it. The Atmarans arrived. The human settlers, who would eventually become the Nordic people, came across the sea from the frozen continent of Atmara and began establishing settlements in Skyrim. The earliest and most significant of these was Saarthal, which the game's College of Winterhold questline visits in a still partially intact underground form. What happened at Saarthal is called the Night of Tears, and it changed everything. The Snow Elves attacked. They came in force, and they killed nearly everyone in the settlement, burning it to the ground. Only 3 people survived: Ysgramr and his 2 sons, Ingol and Ylgar, who escaped and fled back to Atmora. For a long time, the standard historical understanding of the Night of Tears was that it was a simple act of racial aggression. The Snow Elves feared human expansion and tried to drive the newcomers out. But the College of Winterhold questline reveals something more complicated. Beneath Saarthal is the Eye of Magnus, a relic of staggering power, something that predates conventional magic entirely, possibly a fragment of a previous Kalpa, a remnant from before the current cycle of existence began. The Snow Elves knew it was there. Their attack was not random violence. It was a targeted strike to either retrieve or destroy, an artifact of power that they could not allow the humans to inadvertently possess or use. The civilian deaths were catastrophic and inexcusable. The destruction of Saarthal was a genuine atrocity, but it was not simply an act of fear or hatred. It was a desperate move in a magical arms race, and understanding that does not make it less terrible, but it makes it more complex. Ysgramr did not receive this context, or if he did not act on it. He returned to Atmora and gathered warriors, 500 of them. The 500 companions, legendary warriors each individually recorded in Nordic saga, who sailed back to Skyrim with one purpose. They came to erase the Snow Elves from the province entirely, and they largely succeeded. The Nordic Falmer War was brutal and one-sided. The Snow Elves were pushed back steadily, their civilization dismantled settlement by settlement, their population decimated. Their last significant military stand came at the Battle of the Mosring on Solstheim, led by the Snow Prince, a legendary warrior whose armor and spear are still findable in the game. The Snow Prince was killed by a child. A human girl named Finna, whose mother had just been cut down, picked up a fallen sword and threw it in grief and desperation, and the throw took the Snow Prince in the neck. His death broke the Falmer's will, and the survivors fled underground. They went to the Dwemer, because the Dwemer were also Mer, distant cousins, fellow elves, and therefore perhaps allies, or at least sanctuary givers, in a world that had turned against them. The surviving Snow Elves descended into the depths and asked for protection. The Dwemer agreed, on one condition. The Snow Elves had to eat the fungi that grew in the deep underground places of Blackreach. They were told it was the only food available in the caverns. They were not told that the fungi contained a toxin. They were not told that eating it would make them blind. This is described in the lore as deliberate, not an accident, not an unforeseen side effect. The Dwemer fed the Snow Elves a poison that progressively destroyed their vision, specifically because a population that could not see was a population that was dependent, controllable, and easily exploited. The blindness was not a tragic side effect of harsh underground living conditions. It was engineered, a calculated act of cruelty disguised as necessity. And the blindness did not stop with the generation that first ate the fungi. It propagated. Every generation of snow elves, born underground, inherited the damage. The toxin had corrupted them at such a deep biological level that their descendants were born blind. And then, over centuries, and then millennia of dark, enslaved, underground existence, they changed in other ways. Their bodies adapted to environments where sight was not needed. Their minds adapted to lives that offered nothing but servitude and darkness. By the time the Dwemer disappeared in 1E700, the Snow Elves had already become something that their ancestors would not have recognized. When the Dwemer vanished, the Falmer, as they had become, found themselves in a strange position. Their captors were gone. The ruins were theirs, in a sense. But the damage was done. The civilization they had once been was not something that could be recovered by simply removing the people who had destroyed it. Thousands of years of physical, biological, and cultural degradation had transformed them beyond recovery in any near-term sense. Knight Paladin Gelibor, one of the two surviving uncorrupted snow elves, mentions something quietly remarkable when you speak with him in Dawnguard. He says that the Falmer, the degraded ones he calls the betrayed, are actually slowly recovering. Over the centuries since the Dwemer disappeared, they have been, generation by generation, regaining some of the intelligence and organizational capacity that was beaten and bred out of them. By the Fourth Era, they have become sophisticated enough to mount coordinated raids on surface settlements. Some scholars theorize this represents the beginning of a very long process of cultural recovery. Others think it is simply the development of a new kind of sophisticated predator. Whether the Falmer can eventually become something like what the Snow Elves once were is one of those questions the Elder Scrolls universe prefers to leave hanging. It is a hopeful possibility nested inside one of the saddest histories in the whole fictional world. The Forgotten Vale, the hidden Snow Elf sanctuary in Dawnguard, sits preserved in its original state, beautiful and haunted. You can walk through what their civilization might have preserved, and then walk out to meet the twisted, blind things their people became. The contrast is the whole story. The Companions were founded, as noted in an earlier section, as a force of retaliation for the Night of Tears. Ysgramor assembled his 500 specifically to drive the Snow Elves from Skyrim. The organization that is now synonymous with Nordic warrior honor, whose members speak of justice and valor, began as a racial extermination campaign. People and institutions can evolve beyond their origins across millennia. The modern Companions have no active connection to that purpose, but the seed from which they grew is darker than the heroic mythology suggests. Section 5. Guilds, cults, and the organizations that run the world. Skyrim's power does not flow through its jarls or its emperor. Not really. The actual architecture of power in the province is made of older structures, guilds and cults and secret societies that have been running for so long that they predate the concept of a Skyrim nation. Let us take each of the major ones in turn and go deeper than the surface of their quests. The Companions are the oldest. Most players assume they are Skyrim's local warrior guild, an ancient but provincial institution. The reality is substantially more dramatic. The Companions did not originate in Skyrim. They were founded in Atmora, the frozen continent to the north, before any humans had migrated to Tamriel. Their origin is inseparable from Ysgramor and the 500 Companions who sailed south after the Night of Tears. The organization the Companions represent is therefore not a warrior guild in the conventional sense. It is a continuation of the original founding force of Nordic civilization in Skyrim, the warriors whose combined might establish the first permanent human presence in the province. And the Harbinger title that the current leader of the Companions holds traces directly back to that original group. The word Harbinger itself is a reference to the original seafaring, to the person who went ahead of the fleet to announce what was coming. The Jorvasker, the upturned longboat that serves as the Companions' headquarters in Whiterun, is not a symbol. It is the actual vessel, or a surviving piece of one, that carried some of the original 500 Companions to Skyrim's shores. They dragged it inland from the coast and built around it, creating a permanent monument to the journey that brought them there. A piece of the most important boat in Nordic history, sitting in the middle of Whiterun's Wind District, used as a mead hall. The werewolf situation within the Companions is its own complicated thing. Somewhere in the organization's history, the Inner Circle, the group known as the Circle, adopted a pact that involved lycanthropy. The beast blood, becoming werewolves, in their view, made them better warriors, stronger and more capable of fulfilling the Companions' mission. But the cost of the beast blood is theological as much as physical. In Nordic belief, a werewolf cannot enter Sovngarde after death. The beast blood corrupts the soul in a way that bars it from the Nordic afterlife. For a culture that places profound importance on an honorable death and a glorious passage to the mead hall of the dead, this is not a minor inconvenience. It is spiritual damnation. Codlac Whitemane, the Harbinger players meet at the start of the Companion's questline, carries the beast blood and despises it. He did not seek it out. He was given it as part of his induction into the Circle, likely at a time when he believed it would make him a better warrior, and before he fully understood what he was sacrificing. By the time we meet him, he is an old man who knows he is dying, and who has spent years researching a way to cure himself, not because he fears death, but because he wants to be able to reach Sovngarde when it comes. His entire motivation is not survival. It is the desire to be worthy of the afterlife. He devoted his life to earning. The Companion's questline, at its heart, is about helping an old man die with the soul he actually wanted to have. Now let us talk about the Thieves Guild, which is interesting for a reason that most players never think about. The Thieves Guild is not actually a thieves guild, at least not fundamentally. It is a religious organization. The guild's success is not the product of professional skill and careful planning, though it has those things. It is the product of a divine pact with Nocturnal, the Daedric prince of night and luck. Nocturnal blessed the guild through an agreement made generations ago. The skeleton key, her Daedric artifact, was the physical expression of that blessing in the mortal world. As long as the key remained in the guild's possession, their luck held. Heists that should have gone wrong went right. Guards who should have turned at the wrong moment looked away instead. Plans that had single points of failure somehow held together. The guild's improbable record of success over the years was not entirely their own doing. It was supernatural. When Mercer Frey stole the skeleton key and used it for his own enrichment, the divine pact was broken. Nocturnal's favor evaporated, and the guild began falling apart immediately. Members got caught. Plans failed. Revenue dried up. What looked like a run of bad luck was actually the removal of the divine protection that had been quietly running in the background of everything they did. The shadow marks that the Thieves Guild uses, those subtle symbols carved near buildings and doorways across every city in Skyrim, are evidence of the guild's genuine sophistication. Not as criminals, but as a covert communication network. The marks indicate safe houses, empty locations, dangerous buildings, guards to avoid, and useful contacts, all without any written language that non-members could read. Someone who knows the system sees a city full of information. Someone who does not sees random scratches in stone. The system has apparently been in place and maintained long enough that marks exist in cities the guild does not heavily operate in, suggesting the network is far older and more extensive than any individual member knows. The Dark Brotherhood is the most theologically unusual organization in Skyrim, and possibly in all of Tamriel, because what the Dark Brotherhood actually worships is not a Daedric prince. It is not a deity in any conventional sense at all. Sithis is the void, the primordial nothingness that existed before creation, before the first god thought, the first thought that led to the making of the universe. Sithis is not a being with a personality and preferences and a realm to retreat to. It is the fundamental absence of everything, change and entropy, and the inevitable dissolution of all things, given a name because mortals need to name things in order to relate to them. The Dark Brotherhood's theology, at its most honest, holds that death is not a tragedy, but a sacrament. Everything that exists is temporary. Every person, every civilization, every god will eventually return to the void. The Brotherhood sees itself as the servants of that inevitable process, hastening specific returns to nothingness when Sithis, mediated through the Night Mother, directs them to. In their framework, assassination is not crime. It is holy work, conducted in service of a cosmic principle that transcends the petty morality of any living civilization. The Night Mother herself has a history that is genuinely terrible to sit with. She was a woman who had 5 children. According to the foundational legend of the Dark Brotherhood, Sithis came to her and offered her a terrible elevation. If she killed her 5 children and sent their souls to the void, she would become the Dread Father's bride and the progenitor of a new form of worship. She accepted. She murdered all 5 of her children. Her neighbors discovered what she had done and killed her, burned her house down, and tried to erase her from the community's memory. 30 years later, a man began hearing whispers. The Night Mother was speaking from beyond death, channeling contracts through a living intermediary, the first listener, and the Dark Brotherhood began. Her preserved corpse is still present in Skyrim, carried reverently by Cicero the Keeper in his wagon when the player first encounters him. Cicero represents something worth understanding deeply. He is not simply an entertaining eccentric. He is the last link to the Brotherhood's oldest traditions, a man who spent years alone with a dead body, maintaining practices and rituals that nobody else alive still cared about, slowly losing his mind to the isolation, but never losing his faith. His journals, readable in the game, show the transformation. Early entries are professional and competent. He is a skilled assassin with a dark sense of humor about his work. Over months, and then years, as the Brotherhood contracted and died around him, as members fell and were not replaced, and the organization he had devoted his life to ceased to exist everywhere, except in his own continued practice of it. The journals get stranger and more desperate, and finally genuinely unhinged. But throughout, the faith remains. He keeps doing the rituals because there is nobody left to do them if he stops. He keeps the Night Mother's corpse because she is the last real piece of the Brotherhood that actually matters. That level of devotion, that kind of stubborn, maddening, lonesome commitment to something that the rest of the world has abandoned, is one of the most human things in the game. Even if Cicero expresses it in ways that are deeply unsettling, the 5 tenets of the Dark Brotherhood are worth understanding as more than operational rules. They are religious doctrine. Never dishonor the Night Mother. Never betray the Brotherhood or its secrets. Never disobey or refuse to carry out an order from a Dark Brotherhood superior. Never steal the possessions of a Dark Brother or sister. Never kill a Dark Brother or sister. Breaking any of these does not simply get you fired. It invokes the wrath of Sithis. The punishment is death. The tenets represent the boundary between membership and execution, and they are absolute. Astrid's eventual betrayal of the Brotherhood, which she commits with the genuine belief that she is protecting her people, is the thing that destroys it. The tenets are not just practical rules. They are the load-bearing walls of the organization. When the leader herself violates them, the whole structure collapses. The Morag Tong, the assassin guild operating in Morrowind, predates the Dark Brotherhood and is its theological opposite in at least one key respect. The Morag Tong is legally sanctioned. They operate within the law of Dunmer society, performing religiously mandated killings approved by religious authorities. The Dark Brotherhood split from them centuries ago, rejecting the legal framework entirely and embracing pure service to Sithis. One organization kills within the law, the other kills despite it. Both trace their origins to the same tradition. Their philosophical divide is the difference between institutional religion and radical faith. Section 6. The political shadow game, power, manipulation, and what the war is really about. The civil war in Skyrim is not what it appears to be. This is not a cynical reading of the narrative. It is the explicit content of documents the player can find in the game if they look carefully enough. The conflict between the Imperial Legion and the Stormcloak Rebellion is real. The deaths are real. The suffering of the people caught between the two sides is real. But the faction that benefits from the war continuing indefinitely is neither of the ones that are fighting it. The Thalmor, the ruling council of the Aldmeri Dominion, the High Elven supremacists who forced the Empire to sign the White Gold Concordat and ban Talos worship, do not want either side to win. This is not speculation. It is the explicit content of documents findable at the Thalmor embassy during the diplomatic immunity quest. The papers classify the current state of the civil war as acceptable, meaning productive, from their perspective, precisely because it is indecisive. Every soldier who dies fighting for Ulfric, or for the Empire, is a soldier who is not available to fight the Aldmeri Dominion when the Second Great War inevitably comes. Every gold septim spent on the conflict is a resource diverted away from anti-Thalmor military preparation. The war is bleeding Skyrim and the Empire simultaneously, and the Thalmor are watching from outside the ring with satisfaction. Ulfric Stormcloak is the most complicated element of this. He is, by his own account, and the accounts of his followers, fighting for genuine principles. Skyrim's independence, the right to worship Talos, freedom from an empire he believes has become a puppet of the Dominion, and all of these are real grievances. The White Gold Concordat was a humiliation. The Talos ban is a genuine religious injustice. The Empire's compromises with the Thalmor are real compromises. But the Thalmor dossier on Ulfric, findable in the embassy, reveals a background that complicates everything. During the Great War, Ulfric was captured by Thalmor forces. He was interrogated by a Thalmor agent named Elenwen, who is, at the time of Skyrim's events, the first emissary and ambassador of the Dominion in Skyrim. During that interrogation, the Thalmor lied to Ulfric. They told him that information he had provided during his captivity had been crucial to their capture of the Imperial City, allowing them to breach the walls and turn the tide of the war. This was false. The city had already fallen before Ulfric broke. The information he gave them was operationally useless, but the lie served a different purpose. It made Ulfric believe that he had inadvertently betrayed the Empire, that the information he provided had led to the deaths of people he was fighting for. This belief, this guilt, combined with his legitimate anger at the White Gold Concordat and the Talos ban, pushed him toward radical action. He was, in the Thalmor's own language, an unwitting asset, not a spy, not a traitor. Someone whose authentic emotions and genuine convictions made him a useful tool, moving on his own initiative in directions that happened to serve the Dominion's interests. The Thalmor document makes this explicit. It notes that Ulfric's value is in maintaining the civil war without a decisive conclusion. If the Stormcloaks were winning too decisively, the Thalmor would intervene to strengthen the Imperial side. If the Empire appeared to be crushing the rebellion, they would find ways to support the Stormcloaks. The goal is perpetual, grinding, resource-consuming stalemate. The goal is for both sides to be too exhausted and depleted to resist when the Dominion decides to make its next move. There is something especially tragic about Ulfric's situation when you understand it fully. He is a man of genuine conviction who has been weaponized precisely because of that conviction. His authenticity, his sincere passion for his cause, is the thing that makes him useful. A cynical opportunist would be easier to manage, more likely to make pragmatic compromises, more likely to negotiate his way out of the conflict. Ulfric's unwavering belief that he is fighting for something righteous is what keeps the war going in exactly the way the Thalmor need it to go. He is being used by his own integrity. The Forsworn, the enemies that players encounter throughout the Reach, wearing antler headdresses and wielding Briarheart magic, are almost universally treated as generic bandits by the game's presentation. They are not. They are the indigenous people of the Reach, the descendants of the original Breton inhabitants who lived in Markarth and the surrounding territory long before Nordic conquest. Their rebellion is a land dispute conducted through violence, which is a description that applies to most wars if you strip away the ideology. The Markarth incident is the specific political event that radicalized moderate Reachmen into joining the violent Forsworn movement. Ulfric Stormcloak retook Markarth from Forsworn control and was permitted, in exchange, to allow Talos worship among his militia. When the Thalmor complained, the Empire had Ulfric arrested and the Talos arrangement cancelled, breaking the promise that had been made to him. This betrayal confirmed for many Reachmen that they would receive no justice through political means, because the political process consistently treated them as irrelevant. The Forsworn's guerrilla war against Nord settlers is not separable from this history. They are simultaneously people with a legitimate historical grievance and people conducting violence against civilians, and the game does not resolve this tension for you. The Forsworn Briarhearts deserve a moment of their own. These senior Forsworn warriors have had their hearts literally cut out and replaced with a Briarheart, a magical plant grown by hagravens. The procedure makes them more powerful, combat-capable fighters, but it also makes them vulnerable in a very specific way. If you pickpocket the briar heart out of a briar heart warrior's chest while they are still alive, they die instantly. The logistics of pickpocketing someone's artificial heart out of their chest while they are standing there is a question the game wisely chooses not to examine too closely. Maven Blackbriar sits at the center of Riften's political reality as a different kind of shadow power. She is not operating through ideology or historical grievance. She is operating through control of the economic and criminal infrastructure of the city. She owns the meadery that employs much of Riften's working population. She has relationships with both the Thieves' Guild and the Dark Brotherhood. She holds leverage over virtually every significant figure in the city, including the Jarl's own steward. The Jarl of Riften is, functionally, Maven's figurehead. If the Empire wins the Civil War and the Imperial questline is completed, Maven Blackbriar becomes the new Jarl of Riften. This does not represent a change in who runs Riften. It represents a change in title. Maven has been running the city for years. The Jarl position simply gives her official authority to match the unofficial authority she already exercised completely. This is the game's most cynical and probably most realistic political observation, that formal power structures often simply ratify and make visible the informal power structures that have been operating all along. Windhelm is the oldest city in Skyrim, founded by Wisegrammer himself, and in some ways it represents everything problematic about Nordic cultural insularity made architectural and institutional. The Dark Elves in Windhelm have been there for approximately 200 years, since the Red Mountain eruption in 4E5 drove them from Morrowind. Multiple generations of Dark Elves have been born in Windhelm who have never seen Morrowind and have no practical identity as immigrants. They are as Skyrim-born as any of their Nordic neighbors, and they are still confined to the slum, still facing casual and institutional discrimination, still treated as guests who have overstayed their welcome in a city where some of them have lived their entire lives. The Argonians cannot even enter the city walls. They live on the docks, outside, in winter, in the coldest city in Skyrim. This is not a response to any specific Argonian behavior. It is simply structural racism, encoded into the city's rules and maintained without examination across generations. Ulfric Stormcloak, who positions himself as a champion of freedom and Nordic dignity, does nothing about any of this. His freedom is specifically Nordic freedom. The freedom of the non-Nord residents of Skyrim to live without systematic discrimination is not something his ideology has space for. Section 7. Hidden Figures. NPCs with secret lives. Skyrim is full of people who are not what they appear to be. The game rewards careful attention to dialogue and behavior, with revelations that reframe entire characters. Heimskr, the preacher in Whiterun's marketplace, who shouts about Talos in a voice that seems designed to drive passers-by to irritation, was once a scholar, not a street preacher, an academic whose area of research was Nordic theology, specifically the theological implications of Talos worship and the question of whether the White Gold Concordat's religious provisions had metaphysical consequences beyond their political ones. He had credentials. He published work. He was taken seriously by people who study these things. When the White Gold Concordat made Talos worship illegal, Heimskr reached a conclusion through his research that he considered too important to keep quiet. He believed that suppressing Talos' status as a divine being would have real consequences for the nature of divinity in Tamriel. He tried academic channels first, papers, arguments, reasoned engagement with the theological community. None of it worked. Nobody in power wanted to hear it. So, he went to the street corner. He started preaching, not because he had lost his mind, but because the measured, careful approach of scholarship had failed to convince anyone. And then years of being ignored and mocked and occasionally threatened did what years of isolation and frustration tend to do. The sermons got louder. The language got more extreme. The academic framing got worn away by desperation and repetition until what remained looked, from the outside, like someone who had simply come unstuck. His theology, if you actually listen to it, is sophisticated. It is not ranting. It is a structured theological argument being delivered at maximum volume because that is the only option he has left. The annoying street preacher in Whiterun is an intellectual who watched the institutions he trusted decide that his truth was illegal, and responded by refusing to be quiet about it. Sybil Stentor, the court wizard of Solitude, has served the Blue Palace through multiple rulers, spanning well over a century. She is a vampire, a thoughtful, civilized, highly functional vampire who has chosen to embed herself in mortal society and use her immortality for something other than predation. She feeds discreetly from willing donors. Most people in the palace know or strongly suspect what she is. They tolerate it because she is genuinely too valuable to remove. A court wizard who has personally witnessed 100 years of Solitude's political history is not a resource you can simply replace. She has context for every major family rivalry, every treaty, every succession crisis that the city has experienced in living and beyond living memory. Her knowledge is irreplaceable. The arrangement is stable, and she is, by the standards of her kind, remarkably ethical about the whole situation. Galathyl, the face sculptor in Riften's Ragged Flagon, provides a peculiar service. For gold, she will completely reconstruct your face. The game flags her as a vampire through small visual and dialogue cues, her eyes, the pallor of her skin. Certain things she says that carry the particular weight of someone who has seen too much time pass. Why does a vampire operate a face-changing service in a thieves' guild tavern? The game does not explain. But a vampire who can change faces is a vampire who can always be someone new, who is never in the same form long enough to be identified as the creature she is, who has a professional cover that keeps people coming to her rather than fleeing from her. And the clientele of the Ragged Flagon, people who need new identities, are not going to ask too many questions about her nature as long as the service is good. Esbern, the old man hiding in Riften's Ratway, who turns out to be one of the last surviving blades, is presented initially as a paranoid eccentric. He speaks in fragments, he jumps at sounds. He has been living behind locked doors in a sewer for decades, surrounded by evidence of the people who are hunting him. This paranoia is not pathology, it is accuracy. The Thalmor systematically hunted and killed the Blades after the Great War, and the fact that Esbern is still alive is the direct result of levels of caution that would look like madness to anyone who did not know the context. Every Blade he ever knew or worked with is dead, not retired, not scattered, dead, killed by the Thalmor's purge. The organization that was the central pillar of his professional and personal identity has been functionally exterminated. He is the last remaining link to the Blades' institutional knowledge about dragons. This knowledge, locked in the mind of a paranoid old man in a Riften sewer, is irreplaceable. The fact that he survived to pass it on is the result of being just cautious enough, just long enough. Aventus Aretino, the boy the player finds in Windhelm performing the Black Sacrament to summon the Dark Brotherhood to kill Grelod the Kind, who runs an abusive orphanage, is one of the game's most quietly devastating characters. He is a child. He has escaped the orphanage. He has retrieved his mother's remains. He has learned a forbidden ritual. He has spent days or weeks performing it alone in the dark, in an empty house, talking to a dead effigy, hoping that assassins would hear him. This is what systematic institutional abuse does. It eliminates every option until a child is left with no recourse except to summon professional killers. He is not a villain. He is a small person who ran out of everything else. The game trusts the player to hold this complexity without explaining it. When you arrive, he is simply relieved. Someone came. Someone heard him. He does not fully understand what he has done. He just knows that someone answered when he called into the dark. The giant near Broken Fang Cave, standing silent vigil over a dead mammoth, is one of the game's quietest and most affecting pieces of environmental storytelling. Giants and mammoths maintain genuine symbiotic relationships. They travel together. This giant's companion is dead, and he is grieving. He does not attack unless threatened. He is simply present with his loss. Days later, if you return, he is still circling the location. Giants are one of Skyrim's most misunderstood species. They do not attack without provocation. They are semi-nomadic herders, following generational migration routes with their mammoth companions. The cave paintings and astronomical markings in their camps suggest cognitive sophistication that their lack of spoken language might lead players to underestimate. Section 8. Daedric Princes and the Artifacts They Leave Behind. The Daedric princes are not gods in the sense that the divines are. They did not participate in the creation of Mundus. They retained everything they had, existing outside of Mundus in their own realms, and because they kept all of their divine power, they are, in many ways, more immediately powerful than the Aedra who gave so much of themselves to create the world. They are also, almost without exception, not safe to deal with, but some are more complicated than others. Meridia was not always Daedric. She was originally one of the Magna Gae, the group of divine beings who fled Mundus during its creation through the holes they tore in the fabric of reality. She was supposed to go with them to Aetherius. Instead, she became fascinated with mortals and the world that was being made, and she stayed. The other, Magna Gae and the Aedra, considered this aberrant. She was eventually cast out of the divine community entirely, becoming something that is neither traditionally Aedric nor Daedric. Her hatred of undead stems partly from this history. She associates herself with life and light, with the original creative impulse of Mundus, and she sees necromancy and vampirism as corruptions of the natural order she once helped put in place. This makes her gifts genuinely motivated by something resembling principle rather than self-interest or manipulation. But it does not make her safe. Her fanaticism about undeath means she approaches the problem with a single-mindedness that has no room for collateral consideration. Her champions are instruments of her will, not objects of her care. Dawnbreaker is a real weapon against undead, and a real gift, but receiving it means becoming part of her crusade, on her terms, whether or not those terms ever get clearly stated. Hermes Mora is the most genuinely frightening Daedric prince in the game, and the fear is not the obvious fear of violence or destruction. It is the slower, quieter fear of a trap that looks like an opportunity. Hermes Mora is the prince of knowledge and fate. His realm, Apocrypha, is an infinite library containing every book ever written and many that have not been read. Black pools of liquid between endless stacks of shelves that stretch out of sight in every direction. The black books scattered around Skyrim and Solstheim, readable artifacts that pull the reader into Apocrypha, each contain a fragment of forbidden knowledge. Reading them grants power, real, useful, significant power. Shouts, abilities, permanent buffs. The knowledge is genuine. But each time you read a black book, you are spending more time in Apocrypha, more time in Hermes Mora's presence, more time under his observation and within his influence. He collects souls the way other princes collect trophies, but his method is intellectual seduction rather than violence or manipulation. He gives you exactly what you want, and in the process, you become increasingly his. The Ogma Infinium takes this to its logical extreme. The book offers instant mastery of entire skill trees, decades of training absorbed in moments. The knowledge is real. The boost is real. But the lore holds that the knowledge does not integrate naturally. It is forcibly implanted, overwriting existing neural pathways and memories to make room for the new information. Reading the Infinium does not make you better at something. It makes you into someone different who is good at something. Mora does not give knowledge as charity. He trades your current identity for expanded capability. Each reader becomes, in a small but real way, more his. Molag Bal, the prince of domination and enslavement, created vampirism, not through an accident or an experiment, but through an act of violation so complete that it fundamentally corrupted a mortal and spread from that original corruption outward through blood contact across thousands of years. Every vampire who has ever existed traces their condition back to that first moment. Pureblood vampires like Serana, born with vampirism as their nature rather than contracting it as a disease, are closer to the original source and therefore more powerful. The disease has diversified and mutated across millennia. Sanguinari vampiris, the common Skyrim strain, is a relatively diluted version of the original condition. The sun's effect on vampires is not purely biological, it is theological. Auriel, the elven equivalent of Akatosh, sanctified the sun specifically against the undead. The light that damages vampires is not simply bright. It carries a divine anti-undead blessing baked into its nature by a god whose opposition to necromantic perversion of life is a fundamental principle of his being. This is why Auriel's bow, in the Dawnguard DLC, can interact with the sun directly. Shooting it with blood-cursed arrows can temporarily block the sun, removing its divine effect on vampires. Shooting it with sun-hallowed arrows enhances the effect, bathing the entire region in intensified anti-undead radiance. The bow is not just a weapon. It is a tool for interacting with a theological property of the sun itself. The Mephala connection to the ebony blade is one of the game's most morally serious design choices. Mephala is the Daedric prince of lies, secrets, and plots. Her artifact, the ebony blade, does not grow stronger through combat in general. It grows stronger, specifically through betrayal. The blade must be used to kill people who trust and care about the player character. Friends, followers, spouses, allies. Each act of betrayal makes the weapon more potent. This is not an accidental consequence of how the artifact works. It is the artifact's purpose. Using the ebony blade to its fullest potential requires becoming, in a systematic and deliberate way, the embodiment of treachery. The game does not force you to do this. It simply offers the opportunity and watches what you choose. The Soul Cairn makes the common practice of Soul Gem enchanting into something darker than most players consider. Every time a soul trap spell is used, and an enemy's soul is captured and later used for enchanting, that soul ends up in the Soul Cairn, the endless purple-gray wasteland visible in the Dawnguard DLC. The shades wandering through it are the souls of everyone who has ever died with a soul trap active on them. Not monsters only, not people who chose this fate. Anyone unlucky enough to be killed by someone with the right spell active. Mages casually trap and consume souls without considering what this means. The economic system of Skyrim runs partly on spiritual imprisonment. The Soul Cairn makes this visible in a way the game never lectures you about, but makes impossible to ignore once you have seen it. The Reaper guards the Soul Cairn specifically, a hidden boss requiring the collection of 3 gem fragments scattered across the zone before he can be summoned at a specific altar. He appears to be the warden of this afterlife prison, a powerful entity whose function is ensuring the trapped souls remain contained. Who created him, what authority he serves, and whether the Soul Cairn's architecture is natural or artificial are all questions the game raises without answering. The Reaper raises the possibility that someone designed the Soul Cairn as a place of permanent confinement, that the suffering of trapped souls is not an unfortunate side effect, but an intended outcome. This is the kind of quietly terrible implication that the Elder Scrolls universe specializes in. Section 9. Easter eggs and the developers. Inside the game. Bethesda built themselves into Skyrim in several places, and the most transparent of these is Mike the Liar. This wandering Khajiit, findable on the roads of Skyrim and in earlier Elder Scrolls games as well, is Bethesda's direct self-insertion. Every line he speaks exists in a strange space between character dialogue and developer commentary, and the game officially disclaims it all by making Mike a compulsive liar. His name means liar. Anything he says could be false. This gives Bethesda plausible deniability, while also meaning, paradoxically, that everything he says could be true. His dialogue directly references features that were in earlier Elder Scrolls games and removed from Skyrim. Calipers, the alchemical tools found as junk items in Oblivion, are referenced when Mike comments on never finding them. The backwards flying dragons that plagued the game's early builds are acknowledged. Specific fan complaints about game design decisions are addressed through this one NPC who cannot technically be trusted about anything. He has appeared in Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. Either multiple Khajiit share the name as some kind of hereditary title, or this particular Mike has lived impossibly long. The game's position is that it cannot confirm any of these explanations. It simply presents him and declines to resolve the mystery. The notched pickaxe at the summit of the throat of the world is a tribute and diplomatic gesture. In 2011, when both Skyrim and Minecraft were in public development and release, Mojang, the company behind Minecraft, led by Marcus Persson, publicly registered the name Scrolls for a new game. Bethesda's legal team viewed this as potentially infringing on their Elder Scrolls trademark and filed a lawsuit. The dispute was eventually settled out of court, with Mojang's game allowed to keep its name. The notched pickaxe, with its name clearly referencing Notch, Persson's public nickname, and its placement at the highest possible point in the game, is Bethesda's way of saying that, whatever the legal departments had to say about it, the developers held no personal ill will. a peace offering placed at the top of the world, requiring genuine effort to reach. Eric the Slayer, a young farmhand in Rorikstead who dreams of becoming an adventurer, is named after Eric West, a Skyrim fan who died of cancer before the game's release. His family contacted Bethesda, and the development team added the character as a tribute. You can help Eric fulfill his dream by talking his father into allowing him to pursue the adventuring life and paying for his equipment, after which he becomes available as a follower. But Eric, unlike some NPCs, is not protected by essential status. He can die permanently if he takes too much damage in combat. Some players find this inappropriate, a memorial that can be killed. Others see it as a way of allowing the in-game Eric to live a life of genuine adventure and genuine risk, the same kind of fully stakes life that the real Eric never had the chance to complete. The development of Skyrim's dragon language is a genuine feat of constructed linguistics. Emil Pagliarulo, Bethesda's senior designer, created 34 runic characters and a working grammar for Dovazul, ensuring that the dragon shouts and inscriptions scattered across the game would be internally consistent and actually translatable. The main theme, Dragonborn, contains lyrics in Dovazul that were written to fit a specific additional constraint. They had to rhyme with the existing Elder Scrolls theme music when translated into English. Todd Howard's request was essentially, write lyrics that work in the dragon language, rhyme with the previous theme, and when translated into English, also make sense and also rhyme. The result is one of the most recognizable pieces of video game music ever recorded, sung by a choir of 30 men specifically recruited to sound, in Howard's words, like a barbarian choir. The game's map is a technical achievement that most players take for granted. When you open the map in Skyrim, you are not looking at a pre-rendered image. You are looking at a real-time three-dimensional rendering of the actual game world as it exists in that moment, viewed from above and processed to look like a physical map. This means that events happening in the game world appear on the map. Absorbing a dragon soul in the game world creates a visible orange glow on the map surface above that location. The weather on the map changes because the map is actually looking at the game's weather system in real time. Before Skyrim was officially in development, Bethesda was in talks with the estate of George R.R. Martin about possibly setting a game in the world of the Song of Ice and Fire novels. The conversations were apparently serious enough that both sides gave them real consideration. Ultimately, Bethesda decided against setting such an expansive game in someone else's intellectual property and redirected their efforts toward developing their own lore further. The dragons and the civil war that became the two pillars of Skyrim's narrative may have been influenced, at least tangentially, by that period of discussion. The overlap in themes is striking enough that the question has been asked publicly. Bethesda has neither confirmed nor denied the connection definitively. The gourd physics are an accident with a specific origin. The gourds scattered throughout Skyrim were modeled on cucuza squash, a real-world fruit native to Mexico. Bethesda's art team researched real gourds to create accurate representations for the game's agricultural environments. The physics engine's interaction with their specific shape and collision model produced behavior that nobody planned but everyone found entertaining. The decision to keep it in the game was probably the result of someone rolling a gourd down a slope in a playtesting session and deciding that stopping it from doing that would be a mistake. Using Fusroda on a pile of gourds is technically the correct historical use of ancient Nordic magic, though not for its intended purpose. The merchant chests beneath each major city are an insight into Bethesda's approach to inventory management. Vendor inventories in Skyrim do not exist as abstract data states. They are physical objects, stored in actual containers, placed in the game world beneath the cities they correspond to. The most famous is the Khajiit caravan chest near Dawnstar, reachable by navigating a specific slope near the Iron Breaker mine. The chest contains the entire inventory of the caravan merchants. This is not a bug in the usual sense. It is a window into a specific design decision about how item systems work, made visible by the fact that the physical boundaries of the game world are imperfect. Skyrim contains 337 readable books with a combined total of 316,000 words of text. The Fellowship of the Ring contains approximately 177,000 words. The entire Lord of the Rings trilogy totals around 576,000 words. Skyrim's in-game library, if you read it cover to cover, would take longer than a single novel and represents more text than most people read in a year. Bethesda hired actual writers to create this content, treating the lore as literature rather than background noise. The history, the fiction, the philosophical treatises, the crude joke books, all of it was written intentionally and exists as readable text available to any player who picks it up. Section 10 Hidden Mechanics, Secret Encounters, and Things the Game Never Tells You. The Headless Horseman is one of Skyrim's most atmospheric secrets, and it is deliberately unexplained. A spectral figure on a spectral horse, riding silently through the night along specific roads across the province, always moving in the direction of Hamvir's Rest, an ancient Nordic burial site. He does not acknowledge the player. He does not attack. He does not communicate in any way. He simply rides, following the same path through the dark every night toward the same destination. His identity is never given. His origin is never explained. There is no quest attached to him. No journal entry unlocks. He simply exists as a piece of atmospheric presence, a ghost doing what ghosts do, returning compulsively to a place that meant something to him when he was alive. Following him leads to Hamvir's Rest and a minor skirmish with Draugr, but no revelation about who he is or why he rides. This is one of the things Skyrim does occasionally and brilliantly. Not everything needs to be explained. Some mysteries are more powerful when they remain mysteries. The Headless Horseman works as a piece of world building precisely because the game declines to demystify him. He exists to remind you that Skyrim is a place where the dead do not always stay quiet and that their business is their own. Giant clubs are technically usable in Skyrim, just not by the player character. The clubs that giants carry cannot be picked up and equipped by the Dragonborn, but they can be given to followers through a specific mechanic. Remove all other weapons from the follower's inventory, then command them to pick up a giant club dropped on the ground nearby. The follower's equipment logic will equip it as a normal weapon. The clubs deal damage based on their raw values, which are enormous. This exploit has been known since the early years of Skyrim's release, and has never been patched. The community treats it as a beloved quirk. Followers swinging tree trunks with devastating effect is an outcome Bethesda clearly decided was worth keeping. Lydia's permanent death is something the game does not warn you about. Lydia, your first potential follower, assigned to you after completing the Dragon Rising quest in Whiterun, is marked as non-essential. This means she can be killed permanently if she takes enough damage in combat. Unlike some NPCs with the essential flag who will simply fall unconscious and recover, Lydia goes down and stays down. Many players have accidentally killed her with a poorly aimed destruction spell, or by leading her into a dragon fight at low level, turned around to find her body, and felt something they did not expect to feel about a video game character. The lack of warning is intentional. The permanent death creates real stakes. Followers are not invincible robots. They are companions you can actually lose, and the possibility of losing them is the thing that makes protecting them feel meaningful. The sleeping tree near Whiterun is an anomaly that the game gestures toward without fully explaining. A strange, enormous tree producing narcotic sap surrounded by unusual organic material unlike anything else in Skyrim. The investigation of this location suggests that the tree is not a tree in the biological sense. It is something that fell from the sky and took root in Skyrim's soil. A crashed organism or vessel from another place entirely, possibly from another plane of existence, or another world altogether. The sap it produces is a potent ingredient for skooma, which explains why there is a Khajiit contact nearby who has a strong interest in the tree despite appearing to be just a merchant. The tree's origin is left deliberately open. The game is comfortable with the possibility that genuinely alien things can exist in the world without explanation or resolution. The Crimson Nirnroot quest in Blackreach is deliberately tedious, and this is intentional design rather than oversight. Finding 30 of the red glowing plants requires thorough, methodical exploration of the entire cavern. There is no map marker. There is minimal guidance. The quest is structured in a way that forces the player to spend significant time in Blackreach rather than rushing through it. The reward, Sindarian's Serendipity perk, is useful but not exceptional. The real reward is the exploration itself. Blackreach took enormous development resources to create and represents the Dwemer at their most astonishing scale. The tedious quest is Bethesda's way of ensuring that players actually see what they built, rather than running through it on the way to the next objective. Whether this approach is appreciated or resented depends heavily on the player. Mehrunes' razor has an instant kill chance that makes it statistically the most potentially powerful weapon in the game, able to kill any enemy, regardless of their level or health, if the low probability proc activates. The randomness reflects the nature of its creator, Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction and Revolution. His gifts are defined by sudden, unpredictable change. The razor does not reward skill or preparation. It rewards presence. When the instant kill triggers on a dragon or a powerful named enemy, the effect is so jarring and disproportionate that it feels almost wrong, like the universe briefly lost track of how powerful the enemy was supposed to be. This is exactly the right feeling for an artifact of a prince whose domain is the disruption of established order. The word walls scattered across Skyrim are monuments to a specific history. Each one marks a location where ancient Nords confronted and overcame a dragon. The words of power carved into them were left specifically for future speakers, for people who would come later and need the thu'um. They are cultural inheritance in stone. The distribution of word walls across the province maps the Dragon War itself, each one a memorial to a confrontation, a record of human resistance. Modern Nords walk past them without reading them, because the dragon tongue is lost to them. But to the Dragonborn, every word wall is a direct line of inheritance from people who fought and survived something nearly impossible thousands of years ago, and thought to leave something behind for whoever came next. Dragon burial mounds deserved their own moment. After the Dragon War ended, devoted cultists gathered the bodies of fallen dragons and built the circular mounds that dot Skyrim's landscape. These were not passive tombs, they were active sites of worship. The cultists believed Alduin would return and resurrect the fallen dragons, so they tended the graves across generations, maintaining them for thousands of years, against exactly this expectation. Even after the dragon cult's political power was broken, isolated believers continued this vigil, passing the duty from parent to child across countless generations. When Alduin does return and begins resurrecting dragons from their mounds, the cultists were right. Their thousands of years of patient, stubborn faith produced an accurate prediction. The Draugr guarding those mounds are, in the lore, former cultists who chose to remain in undead service rather than pass on, waiting for the return they were promised. Section 11. The Greybeards, the thu'um, and the Throat of the World. Jurgen Windcaller's story begins with a military catastrophe. Before the Greybeards, before the Way of the Voice as a philosophy, the thu'um was a standard part of Nordic military tradition. Tongues, warriors trained in the use of the voice, fought in armies and used their shouts in open battle. Entire formations of soldiers would combine their shouts to devastating effect. Reality warping was a standard military doctrine. The Battle of Red Mountain changed this. A Nordic force of tongues, some of the most powerful voice users of their era, suffered a catastrophic defeat despite their mastery of the thu'um. The defeat should not have been possible, according to their understanding of the relative power of the forces engaged. But it happened. And Jurgen Windcaller, one of the greatest tongues of his time who survived the battle, spent years in solitude trying to understand what had gone wrong. His conclusion was theological as much as tactical. The thu'um was being misused. The voice was a gift, he argued, not a weapon. Using it as a standard tool of war, casually deploying reality-altering power in service of military objectives, was a fundamental misunderstanding of what the gift was for. The defeat at Red Mountain was not simply a military setback. It was a consequence of misalignment between the nature of the power and the purpose to which it was being applied. He developed the Way of the Voice, a philosophy that restricts the thu'um to peaceful uses except in cases of absolute necessity. Over time, his teachings spread, and eventually the Greybeards became the custodians of his philosophy. Their mastery of the thu'um has extended their lifespans significantly, not to immortality, but to dramatically slowed aging through the particular kind of sustained, disciplined relationship with the voice that they have maintained across decades and in some cases, centuries. Arngir's patience with the Dragonborn during the main quest is worth appreciating specifically. He teaches a being whose relationship with the thu'um is fundamentally different from anything he has experienced before. The Dragonborn absorbs the thu'um, a word that would take a trained human decades to learn. The Dragonborn understands instantly upon absorbing a dragon's soul. Arngir watches this happen and has to reckon with it. On one hand, the Dragonborn is the fulfillment of the prophecy the Greybeards have been waiting for. On the other hand, the ease with which the Dragonborn acquires power is the opposite of the painstaking, lifelong practice that the Way of the Voice is built around. A person who receives power effortlessly may not develop the wisdom to use it appropriately. This is, implicitly, what Arngir's caution and occasional resistance to helping the Dragonborn is about. He is worried not about whether the Dragonborn can do what needs to be done, but about whether they understand what the doing of it means. The temporal wound at the summit of the throat of the world is one of the most significant locations in the game, for reasons that are easy to walk past without understanding. When Feldir the Old used the Elder Scroll to displace Alduin through time, the act created a permanent scar on the fabric of time at that specific location. The summit of the throat of the world is a location where past, present, and future overlap imperfectly, where the linear flow of time is thinner and more porous than it is anywhere else in Mundus. This is why the Elder Scroll used in the original ritual remains accessible there thousands of years later. Time at that summit moves differently. Things persist that would have faded elsewhere. The scroll is not simply well preserved. It is anchored at the location of its most significant use by the temporal anomaly that use created. When the Dragonborn reads it at the time wound, they are not simply accessing information encoded in the scroll. They are looking directly back through the scar in time to witness the original event. They see the three heroes. They hear the shout. They learn Dragonrend from observing the moment of its first use, across thousands of years, through a crack in the structure of linear reality. The Dragonborn DLC introduces additional shouts that were known on Solstheim but lost in Skyrim. Bend Will allows the Dragonborn to dominate dragons and even ride them. Battle Fury increases allies' attack speed. Cyclone creates devastating wind spirals. Dragon Aspect transforms the player into a scaled armored version of themselves with increased power. These represent thu'um knowledge preserved by Merethic during his millennia in Apocrypha, applications of the voice that the Greybeards would likely consider inappropriate, but that represent the full scope of what the thu'um can do when applied without philosophical restraint. Bend Will, in particular, raises questions about consent and coercion that the Greybeards' philosophy of peace implies they would be deeply uncomfortable with. Commanding the mind of a sentient being with your voice is not covered by any peaceful application Jurgen Windcaller had in mind. The ancient use of the thu'um extended far beyond combat applications. Before the Way of the Voice, Nordic communities used shouts for agriculture, speeding crop growth and clearing land, for construction, reshaping stone, for communication across vast distances, for healing, with certain resonant frequencies reportedly having restorative properties, for artistic and ceremonial purposes in ways that are only hinted at in surviving records. The reduction of the thu'um to primarily its combat applications, which is all the modern Dragonborn really engages with, represents a cultural narrowing. The full knowledge of what the voice can do in peaceful contexts has been largely lost. The Greybeards know some of it. Most of it died with the practitioners who used it before the Dragon War, made combat applications the dominant cultural memory. Section 12. The Bigger Universe. Connections, After Lives, and What Comes After. Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, encountered during the Mind of Madness quest in Skyrim, is significantly more interesting than he first appears. The clues in his dialogue point towards something that changes the nature of what you are interacting with entirely. The Sheogorath in Skyrim contains references scattered through his conversation to events from Oblivion, specifically to events that only the hero of Kvatch, the protagonist of that game, would have personally experienced. He talks about cheese and dungeons and past adventures in ways that only make sense if he was there. The connection that lore enthusiasts have drawn from this is that the Sheogorath encountered in Skyrim is not the original Sheogorath. He is the hero of Kvatch. In the Shivering Isles expansion to Oblivion, the hero was tasked with preventing Sheogorath's realm from collapsing. The solution involved the hero taking on the role of Sheogorath so completely, embodying the Prince of Madness so thoroughly, that when the original Sheogorath was consumed by his darker self, the hero was already the replacement. Already so perfectly Sheogorath that reality accepted them as the genuine article. This process is called mantling. Mantling means becoming something so completely that the universe cannot distinguish between the original and the copy. The hero of Kvatch mantled Sheogorath. They did not kill him or defeat him, they became him. And by the time of Skyrim, that mortal who once adventured through Cyrodiil has been the Prince of Madness for somewhere between 50 and 200 years. The slightly more coherent quality to Skyrim's Sheogorath is the residue of the human who is still, somewhere deep inside the prince, processing what happened to them. This is the concept of mantling in practice. The Elder Scrolls lore holds that divinity is not purely innate. It can be achieved through perfect imitation. If you act sufficiently like a divine principle, with enough consistency and completeness, reality eventually cannot distinguish between what you are performing and what you actually are. At that point, the performance has become the reality. Akatosh and Auriel are the same being. The imperial divine Akatosh, the dragon god of time, and the Aldmer and Altmer deity Auriel, the elven god of time, are cultural expressions of the same underlying cosmic principle. When Alessia established the 8 divines as the foundation of her empire, she created a religious synthesis that merged elements of human and elven theology. Akatosh emerged from this merger. This is why Auriel's bow, findable in the Dawnguard DLC, has the same divine authority in relation to the sun that artifacts associated with Akatosh would carry. They point toward the same thing through different cultural lenses. Alessia herself deserves more attention than she receives in Skyrim specifically. She is the first recorded Dragonborn, not the player character, not a Nord warrior. A slave woman in what is now Cyrodiil, who lived an unremarkable life under elven domination until she chose not to. She led a rebellion of humans against their elven masters. She received the dragon blood through divine blessing, given the ability to absorb souls and speak with the voice. She won. She established the first human empire in Tamriel. Upon her death, she was elevated to sainthood. The player character of Skyrim is the latest in a lineage that begins with a slave woman who decided enough was enough. This matters because it establishes what the Dragonborn power is for. It is not given randomly. It is given when civilization faces an existential threat and needs someone capable of facing it. The Miraak situation, the central antagonist of the Dragonborn DLC, is also the story of the first Dragonborn in a more specific sense than Alessia. Miraak was a dragon priest during the height of the dragon cult's power. He possessed the Dragonborn gift, and Hermes Mora, the Prince of Knowledge, made him an offer. Forbidden knowledge, power beyond what his fellow priests had. In exchange, Miraak served Mora, and when his betrayal of the dragon cult was discovered by another priest named Valok, the confrontation between them was so catastrophic that it literally tore Solstheim away from the Skyrim mainland, reshaping geography through raw magical power. Valok won. Miraak was imprisoned in Apocrypha, and Solstheim became an island. The separation of Solstheim from Skyrim is a permanent geographical consequence of a magical fight between two people thousands of years ago. The strait between them is a scar in the landscape, left by a conflict that most people in Skyrim's 4th era have completely forgotten. Standing on Solstheim's shore and looking across at Skyrim in the distance, you are looking at the shape of an ancient catastrophe. Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife, is a real place, accessible during the main quest, the Mead Hall of Shore, where honored warriors feast and battle across eternity. When you reach it, you find shades of named heroes from Nordic history, people referenced in books and songs across Skyrim's lore, existing in their earned afterlife. The mechanics of who gets in are specific. Warriors who died bravely and with honor are welcomed. The beast blood of lycanthropy corrupts the soul in a way that bars it from entry. The Ebony Warrior at level 80, the Red Guard warrior who approaches the player requesting an honorable death in combat, is seeking a specific form of afterlife. He has achieved everything possible in mortal life, adopted Nordic theology as his own, and wants to die in worthy combat so that his soul qualifies for Sovngarde. This is not suicidal depression. It is a sincere desire to earn a specific afterlife, according to a belief system he has genuinely adopted. When you face him, knowing this, you are not simply fighting an enemy. You are being asked to be someone's ticket to heaven. The moral weight of that is something the game trusts you to feel without explaining it. The white gold tower is visible from Skyrim. If you rotate the in-game map to look southward, extending past the normal, visible edges of the province, you can see it. A simplified but recognizable rendering of the Imperial City's central tower rising from the distant landscape of Cyrodiil. With console commands, players have pushed through the invisible walls at Skyrim's southern border and walked into a rough, low-detail but functional version of Cyrodiil extending beyond the playable area. The two provinces exist in the same continuous world space. The borders are not edges of the world. They are simply the edges of the level of detail that the game renders for playable use. This means that somewhere, in the fog beyond Skyrim's playable borders, the rest of Tamriel exists in an unfinished, sketched-out form. Hammerfell to the west, High Rock beyond that, Morrowind to the east. The game world of Skyrim is not an island. It is a window into a much larger world that exists, in low resolution, in all directions beyond what the player is meant to see. The Blades' history has one more layer worth examining before we close. The Blades were originally Akaviri. They came from the continent of Akavir, across the Eastern Ocean, a mysterious landmass about which very little is canonically established. They invaded Tamriel in the First Era, seeking to destroy dragons. Their invasion failed as a political project, but succeeded as a cultural one. Some Akaviri remained in Tamriel after the failed invasion, and eventually became the organization that served the Septim dynasty as bodyguards and dragon hunters. Their distinctive armor, their katana-style swords, all of these come from their Akaviri origins. They were dragon hunters from another continent who decided to stay, integrated into Tamrielic culture, and eventually became one of its most iconic institutions. By Skyrim's Fourth Era, the Blades are essentially extinct, destroyed by the Thalmor. The two surviving members, Delphine and Esbern, are trying to rebuild something that was once continent-spanning from a concealed temple in a mountainside. Their insistence that the Dragonborn kill Paarthurnax is, in this context, not simply arrogance. It is the last survivors of a decimated organization trying to hold on to the identity that defined them, even when that identity is no longer appropriate to the situation. They are a guild of dragon hunters, and Paarthurnax is a dragon, and the simplicity of that framework is all they have left. The last Dragonborn's fate, after the events of Skyrim and its DLC content, is one of the most deliberately open questions in the series. Unlike previous Elder Scrolls protagonists whose futures are established in later games, the last Dragonborn's ultimate destiny is not recorded. The interactions with Hermes Mora in the Dragonborn DLC are ambiguous in a way that suggests a connection, possibly a debt or service, that may mean the Dragonborn ends up bound to Apocrypha. Or perhaps they broke free. Perhaps they lived a long, quiet life after saving the world. Perhaps they are still out there somewhere, in the Fourth Era, the most powerful mortal alive, with nowhere particular to be. The orc strongholds scattered across Skyrim operate as independent sovereign territories within the province's borders, following the Code of Malakath rather than Nordic or Imperial law. Women hunt and gather. Men focus on smithing and defense. The chief holds absolute authority until successfully challenged in combat. Visitors are welcome if they demonstrate worth through service to any orc, but permanent residency requires full cultural adoption. The Jarls of the holds that contain orc strongholds technically rule the surrounding territory, but have essentially no authority inside the walls. The orcs do not recognize their jurisdiction. They tolerate this because actually forcing compliance would be more trouble than it is worth. Visiting a stronghold reveals a completely different civilization existing within Skyrim's borders, proof that the province is not culturally unified despite its political boundaries. The Khajiit caravans that travel between Skyrim's cities, setting up camps outside the city gates and selling their wares, are not simply merchants. They are intelligence networks. They move freely between holds, see everything, and talk to everyone while appearing to be simple traders. Information gathering is their secondary function, but arguably more important than actual commerce. They report political developments and military movements back to Elswehr's leadership. Some caravans distribute skooma, using addiction as leverage to create informants among the Nordic population. The scheme is brilliant in its cynicism. Supply illegal narcotics, gather intelligence from compromised sources, maintain commercial legitimacy as cover. Players buying from the caravan merchants outside Whiterun or Riften are, in the lore, participating in an ongoing intelligence operation they are almost certainly not aware of. The vampire lord form available in Dawnguard represents the pure blood strain of vampirism at its most expressed. Lord Harkon's bloodline, the Volkihar clan, traces directly back through an unbroken lineage to Molag Bal's original act. Their castle, a Gothic fortress on an island in the Sea of Ghosts, has served as their stronghold for millennia. The clan demonstrates that vampirism does not automatically make someone a monster in the behavioral sense. Intelligence, culture, long-term political goals, and even aesthetic appreciation can be maintained even while requiring blood to survive. Harkon's plan to block the sun represents the ultimate expression of vampire supremacy, removing their primary weakness permanently. His daughter Serana's rejection of this plan shows that even within a vampire noble family, different philosophies exist about what vampirism means and whether coexistence with mortals is desirable or possible. And so we have walked a long way through a world that was made by people who cared deeply about what they were making. 130 facts. Some were strange, some were dark, some were sad in the particular way that fiction can be sad, when it reaches for something true about power and loss, and the distance between what people intend and what they cause. Skyrim is, at its best, a world with more in it than any single person can see in a lifetime of playing. There are books that nobody reads. There are NPCs whose stories never get fully told. There are buildings with histories locked inside their architecture. There are connections between things that the game will never explicitly draw for you, waiting for someone who notices them. We found a few of those connections tonight. There are more where those came from. If this helped you drift off, or if you listened all the way through and now have 50 things you want to go back and verify in the game, drop a comment and let me know. What surprised you most? What do you want to go deeper on? Subscribe if you want more nights like this one. There are more worlds to walk through, and I would love to take you there. Sleep well. Lower your swords. The night is quiet, and you are safe. End of script. Bonus section 40, more facts for the deepest hours of the night. Let the room go quiet. If you are still awake, that is fine. We will keep going a little further into the world. The Galder Amulet quest is one of Skyrim's most self-contained tragedies. Archmage Galder was a respected and beloved mage during the first era of the dragon cult's fading power. His 3 sons, Jirik, Sigdis, and Mikrul, murdered him to steal the amulet that was the source of his power and reputation. They divided it 3 ways, then immediately turned on each other in the manner of people who have just committed their most terrible act and cannot look at one another without seeing what they became. Their mother, Galder's wife, cursed them with her dying breath. The curse ensured they would never rest, never truly die, never find peace. It worked. All 3 are still present in their tombs, thousands of years later, reanimated and hostile, still clutching their fragment of the amulet, still carrying the weight of what they did. Reassembling the amulet does not undo what happened. It ends the curse, which is the closest thing to mercy the situation allows. The College of Winterhold holds actual scheduled lectures between 1 and 3 in the afternoon each day. The mages who teach there, Tolfdir, Faralda, Dravis, Nyria, all have specific lecture schedules built into their daily routines. If a dragon attacks or another significant danger threatens the college, the lectures are canceled for 24 hours before resuming. This is not flavor text for the player's benefit. It is the daily life of an institution that continues operating whether the Dragonborn is there or not. Students attend classes, conduct research, follow routines that exist independent of any quest trigger. The college feels like a real institution rather than just a quest hub, precisely because it behaves like one even when nobody is watching. The Gildergreen in Whiterun is dead for a reason that is specific and genuinely melancholy. The sacred tree did not die of disease or old age or simple neglect. It was loved to death. Generations of worshippers came to the tree and carved their prayers and blessings into its bark, each one believing their individual cut was too small to matter. The accumulated damage of thousands of carvings over centuries of devotion killed it. The tree was literally consumed by the attention of the people who valued it most. The quest to replace it involves either harvesting a cutting from the ancient elder gleam tree in a sacred grove, or persuading the grove's guardian to provide a sapling. Whether you take by force or ask respectfully, the choice reflects back on whether you learned anything from what destroyed the original. Septimus Cygnus, the scholar living in a remote icy outpost north of Winterhold, obsessed with the Dwemer lexicon he has been studying for years, is operating on a timeline that nobody else around him fully understands. He was sent to study the lexicon by Hermes Mora, whose influence tends to produce exactly this kind of consuming, isolating intellectual fixation in its subjects. Septimus has been alone with this device, in this cold place, for long enough that his grip on ordinary social reality has loosened significantly. He calls the Dragonborn a young one, and refers to himself with the gravity of someone who has seen and understood things that most mortals will never approach. He is probably right. He has also become Mora's instrument in a more complete way than he knows. His death at the moment he finally opens the lexicon is not an accident. It is the point. The Thieves' Guild's Nightingales are not just elite members of the guild. They are a separate covenant, bound to Nocturnal through an agreement that persists beyond death. Nightingales serve Nocturnal in life as agents in the mortal world, protecting her shrines and interests. When they die, their souls go to the Evergloam, Nocturnal's realm of eternal twilight, where they continue serving her as part of her spectral guard. The agreement is permanent. Becoming a Nightingale is not a promotion within the guild. It is a contract with a Daedric prince that supersedes death. Players who join the Nightingales during the Thieves' Guild questline have committed their soul to eternal service in exchange for the powers of the Covenant. The game presents this as straightforwardly positive. The long-term implications are something it leaves for the player to sit with. Calixto Corium, the curator of the House of Curiosities in Windhelm, is the Windhelm Butcher. This detail is missable. The murder investigation quest in Windhelm presents the court mage Wunferth as the obvious suspect based on accessible evidence, and many players arrest him without investigating further, at which point another murder occurs, proving his innocence. The actual killer is the friendly, helpful man who runs the museum and eagerly tells you about his collection. He has been murdering young women to harvest body parts for a necromantic ritual intended to resurrect his dead sister. His friendliness and apparent harmlessness is his most effective camouflage. The game is making a specific point about how assumptions of guilt based on social marginalization, the mage in a city that distrusts magic, and assumptions of innocence based on social acceptability, the charming curator who runs a public institution, can work together to protect someone who is doing the most terrible thing imaginable. Barbas, the talking dog who accompanies the player during Clavicus Vile's questline, is the Daedric Prince's own power, externalized. Vile is less effective and more unstable without Barbas than with him. Reuniting them is literally putting a god back together. The dog's affable, slightly weary personality is the personality of a divine being who has spent an eternity dealing with his boss's impulsiveness and whose patience, while not infinite, is much longer than a mortal's. Barbas has seen too much to be surprised by much. He is doing what he does because it is his nature, not because he particularly likes any given version of the situation. He is remarkably good company for a piece of a Daedric prince. The Falkreath graveyard is the largest in Skyrim. This is mentioned in passing by the town's residents, and it is not simply a piece of ambient dialogue. It reflects the history of the area. Falkreath Hold has historically been a site of significant conflict, more so than some other holds, and the graveyard grew correspondingly. Walking through it and reading the headstones reveals specific stories, specific names and relationships and causes of death, each one a small piece of narrative that the game did not need to include, but did anyway. A child's grave, a soldier's grave, stones for people who are not mentioned anywhere else in the game. The graveyard is the game's acknowledgement that the world continued before the Dragonborn arrived and will continue after, and that it is full of people who had whole lives that happened outside the frame of any quest. The Bard's College in Solitude holds an annual festival called the Burning of King Olaf, in which an effigy of King Olaf One-Eye, a legendary Nordic high king, is ceremonially burned. The festival is cancelled at the start of the game due to pressure from Jarl Elisif following the death of her husband. The Bard's College questline involves obtaining the poem, the verse of King Olaf, that justifies the festival's historical basis, restoring the tradition. The politics around whether an ancient historical satire should be suppressed by the current ruling authority because it is inconvenient to them are left for the player to observe without editorial comment. Olaf One-Eye is a real figure in Nordic history within the game's lore. Whether the poem is historically accurate, whether it matters, and whether governments should be in the business of deciding which historical traditions are acceptable are questions the quest raises and deliberately does not answer. Sadia, the Redguard woman hiding in Whiterun's Inn, presents one of the game's most genuinely unresolvable moral puzzles. She claims she is fleeing persecution for speaking out against the Aldmeri Dominion. The men hunting her, who contact the Dragonborn as part of a side quest, claim she betrayed Hammerfell to the Dominion for money. There is no objective way to determine who is telling the truth. Both stories are internally coherent. Both parties behave consistently with their stated accounts. The Dragonborn must choose who to believe, without access to any evidence that definitively resolves it. Whichever choice you make, you are participating in an outcome you cannot be certain is just. This is the game at its most honest about what real moral decisions feel like. Not puzzles with right answers, but choices made under uncertainty, with consequences either way. The main theme of Skyrim, Dovahkiin, was recorded with a choir of 30 men. Todd Howard wanted it to sound like what he described as a barbarian choir, something both epic and ancient, and slightly rough. Jeremy Sewell, who composed the music for Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, worked with Emil Pagliarulo to create the lyrical content in Dovahzul that would work both as dragon language and, when translated, rhyme in English with the existing Elder Scrolls theme melody. The result, Dragonborn, became one of the most immediately recognizable pieces of video game music in history. It plays during the opening sequence where the prisoner watches an execution before dragons arrive. It plays over the first dragon soul absorption. It carries the emotional weight of the game's entire thesis about destiny and power. And it was sung by 30 men, specifically chosen to sound like they might plausibly be Viking warriors who had learned to harmonize. The creation engine, which powers Skyrim, was developed specifically for the game and represented a significant departure from the previous Gamebryo engine that Bethesda had used for Oblivion and Fallout 3. The decision to build a new engine was driven partly by the desire for more complex and natural-looking landscapes. Previous Bethesda games had used procedurally generated landscape, which saved development time but produced environments that felt algorithmically assembled rather than geographically intentional. Every piece of Skyrim's landscape was hand-placed. Every mountain, every forest, every river and road and ruin was positioned by a human being making a deliberate choice. The sense of a world that has been thought about rather than generated is a direct result of this approach. Skyrim was nearly delayed to release on the 7th generation of PlayStation and Xbox consoles, which would have meant a release window of 2013 or 2014 for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Todd Howard and the team at Bethesda ultimately concluded they could achieve what they needed on existing hardware and released in November 2011. The game went on to win numerous Game of the Year awards for 2011 and is still being sold and played more than a decade later in multiple editions and remasters. Whether the 2011 release was the right call has been answered fairly definitively by what followed. The Dawnguard DLC introduced the concept of the partially restored Snow Elf civilization through Knight Paladin Gelibor and his brother Arch-Curate Verthur. Verthur's story is particularly affecting. He was infected with vampirism by another Snow Elf, one of the Betrayed, and his response to this infection was to turn his considerable intelligence and faith toward destroying the thing that had infected him. His plan, to use Auriel's bow with blood-cursed arrows to block the sun and thus deprive vampires of their primary weakness, is a response to personal trauma operating at cosmic scale. He could not fight the Betrayed who infected him directly, so he decided to fight the thing that made vampires vulnerable. The plan is deeply irrational, would cause catastrophic harm to millions of innocents who had nothing to do with his situation, and is the product of a very old, very intelligent, very broken mind that has been alone with its pain for a very long time. The Companion's headquarters sitting in Whiterun means the most respected warrior organization in Skyrim is embedded in the most central and neutral city in the province. Whiterun holds a deliberate political neutrality in the Civil War, sitting at the geographic center of Skyrim and maintaining trade relationships with all holds, regardless of their allegiance. The Companion's own political neutrality mirrors this. They take contracts from anyone. A Companion might fight for the Empire one day and Stormcloaks the next. Loyalty to clients rather than causes. This makes them simultaneously trusted by everyone and aligned with no one. Their survival across millennia of political change is directly attributable to this neutrality. Organizations that tie themselves to political powers fall when those powers fall. The Companions have outlasted every government that existed when they were founded. The Wabbajack, Sheogorath's artifact, is the perfect expression of its creator's nature. When used, it might transform enemies into sweet rolls, or into powerful creatures, or into piles of gold. It might cast lightning. It might do nothing at all. No two uses guarantee the same result. It is simultaneously one of the most powerful and one of the most unreliable weapons in the game, which is exactly right for an artifact of the Prince of Madness. Its power comes from accepting that you cannot control it. The moment you try to use it tactically, to plan around what it will do, you are already thinking about it wrong. Sheogorath's gifts operate on different terms than other Daedric artifacts. They reward chaos and punish the attempt to impose order on them. The Companion's rejection of political power extends to their internal structure as well. The Harbinger is not a commander. The title means something closer to Forerunner or Herald. The Harbinger gives guidance, but does not give orders. Members of the Companions are not employees or soldiers. They are individuals who have chosen to associate under a common tradition. The Inner Circle, the members of the Circle who carry the beast blood, holds a different relationship with the organization than regular members do, but even this is more covenant than hierarchy. The entire structure is designed to function without central authority, which is part of why it has survived so long. Organizations that require a specific leader are vulnerable when that leader is gone. The Companions can persist through any transition because they are a tradition rather than an institution. The Eye of Magnus does not fit any known category of magical artifact because it likely predates conventional magic entirely. The consensus among those who have studied it closely is that it is a remnant from a previous kalpa, a fragment of a universe that ended before the current one began. Its power does not behave like Aedric magic or Daedric magic or even the thu'um, which are the three primary magical frameworks in the Elder Scrolls universe. It is something that precedes all of them. When it activates during the College of Winterhold questline, it threatens to tear reality apart, not because it is especially destructive, but because it operates according to rules that the current universe does not recognize. It is a piece of old physics in a new world. The Sijic Order's decision to remove it from mortal access entirely, rather than study it, reflects an understanding that some things are too foundational to be safe in human hands under any circumstances. The Sijic Order itself represents the oldest magical organization in Tamriel, predating the Mages Guild by an order of magnitude. They study magic at its most fundamental level, which is to say they study reality, and their capability reflects this. When they intervene in the College of Winterhold questline, they can casually freeze time and walk through stopped moments, a capability that makes the college's most powerful mages look like students. They live on an island called Artaeum that occasionally simply removes itself from normal space-time, which is their preferred response to situations they would rather not engage with. The Sijic Order's appearance is a signal of cosmic stakes. They only bother to show up when something fundamental is at risk. The dragon resurrection mechanic, where absorbing a dragon soul prevents Alduin from raising that specific dragon again, is more tactically significant than the game explicitly explains. Alduin's plan upon returning is systematic. He is working his way through the burial mounds, reactivating his ancient army one dragon at a time. The Dragonborn's ability to permanently remove individual dragons from this process by absorbing their souls is the specific counter-tactic that makes the Dragonborn's role irreplaceable. Anyone can kill a dragon in the short term. Only the Dragonborn can ensure Alduin cannot simply raise it again afterward. The Civil War, the guild quests, the Daedric artifacts, all of these are meaningful and worth engaging with. But the core strategic purpose of the Dragonborn, the reason the power exists in this era, is to permanently remove Alduin's ability to reconstitute his forces. Every dragon soul absorbed is a piece of his army that is gone forever. The ancient ruin of Labyrinthian in Hallmarch Hold is the site of the former dragon cult capital known as Bromjunar. During the Merethic Era, when the dragon cult ruled Skyrim, this location was the administrative center of the entire theocracy. The highest-ranking dragon priests gathered here to discuss governance, settle territorial disputes between competing dragon lords, and conduct the most significant ceremonies of the cult's religious practice. The Dragon Priest Shrine, found deep in the ruins, displays busts of the 8 major priests, suggesting this was their primary ceremonial gathering place. The maze-like complexity that gave the ruins their modern name, Labyrinthian, reflects the elaborate administrative and ceremonial architecture of a theocratic government at its height. When the Dragon War ended and the cult was broken, what had been the capital of an empire became just another ruin. The Dunmer, the Dark Elves, were not always dark. In the Elder Scrolls lore, they were once known as the Chimer, elves with golden skin who worshipped the Daedric princes and allied with the Dwemer during the conflicts of the First Era. When the Chimer leaders, the Tribunal, murdered their ally Nerevar and used Khagranak's tools on the heart of Lorkhan to achieve divinity through forbidden means, the Daedric prince Azura responded with a curse. She transformed the golden skin of the entire Chimer people to ash gray. Their eyes became red. The physical change was immediate and complete, affecting not just those who had participated in the betrayal, but the entire race, including those with no personal connection to what had been done. The Dunmer have carried the mark of this curse in their appearance ever since, as a permanent reminder of decisions made by people they never knew, in a time they were not alive to witness. Daedric vengeance does not deal in individual accountability. It deals in civilization-wide consequences. There are 16 Daedric princes in the Elder Scrolls universe, each ruling their own realm of oblivion. Hermes Mora rules Apocrypha, the infinite library. Mehrunes Dagon rules the Deadlands, a volcanic wasteland of ash and fire. Sheogorath rules the Shivering Isles, a realm of beautiful madness split between mania and depression. Nocturnal rules the Evergloam, an eternal twilight where shadows have weight and intention. Azura rules Moonshadow, described as so beautiful that mortals who visit it risk going blind from the beauty. Namira rules the Scuttling Void, a realm of darkness and decay. Each realm reflects its ruler's nature, with complete fidelity. The Plains of Oblivion demonstrate that reality itself is mutable, that physical laws and the concept of death can function completely differently depending on who controls the local rules. What players see in Skyrim represents a tiny fraction of existence. Beyond Mundus lie 16 distinct dimensions, each as internally complex as the mortal world, but operating on entirely different principles. The Amulet of Kings, which all Dragonborn emperors of the Septim dynasty wore, was not just symbolic. It was magically essential to maintaining the barrier between Mundus and Oblivion that prevented the Daedric princes from fully manifesting in the mortal world. Martin Septim's sacrifice at the end of Oblivion, transforming himself into an aspect of Akatosh to destroy Mehrunes Dagon's physical manifestation, shattered the amulet permanently. The protection it provided is gone. The Daedric princes can no longer manifest in the way Dagon did. But the Empire's mystical legitimacy, the divine mandate that made Septim authority not just political but cosmically sanctioned, is also gone. The Empire of Skyrim's era is secular in a way that the Septim Empire was not. Its authority rests entirely on military and economic power, rather than on the blessing of the divine. This is why the Empire feels weaker and more compromised in Skyrim than the histories suggest it once was. The thing that made it special has been spent. Serana, the vampire companion, available in Dawnguard, is one of Skyrim's most thoughtfully written characters. She was sealed in her sarcophagus by her own father, Lord Harkon, as part of a plan involving a prophecy about Oriel's bow. She has been there for an indeterminate period of centuries, She emerges with a matter-of-fact approach to her situation that conceals how genuinely disorienting it must be to wake up into a world that has moved on by hundreds of years. Her gradual adjustment to the Fourth Era, her observations about what has changed and what has stayed the same, and her evolving relationship with the Dragonborn are all handled with a restraint that makes them feel authentic rather than dramatic. She does not perform her alienation. She lives it, quietly, in the margins of the conversations you have with her. The Dawn Guard themselves, the vampire hunters who constitute the alternate faction in the DLC, were an ancient order that had been dormant for years before being reactivated by Isran in response to rumors of Harkon's activity. Their founding purpose and methods are blunter than their enemies. They believe in killing vampires as a category, without exception or negotiation. Their rigidity, which mirrors the Blade's rigidity about dragons, is the thing that makes them effective, and also the thing that would make them unable to deal with Serana if the Dragonborn is trying to broker any kind of peaceful outcome. Isran knows this about himself and his organization. He is not subtle about it. He built the Dawn Guard to be a weapon, not a diplomatic instrument, and he has no illusions that a weapon is a versatile tool. The College of Winterhold's position at the very northeastern tip of Skyrim is not accidental. Magic is distrusted throughout most of the province, associated in the popular imagination with the Thalmor and the Dwemer and various disasters. The college exists at the geographical margin of civilization because that is where it is tolerated. After the Great Collapse destroyed most of Winterhold City, the college was left standing, while the rest of the settlement crumbled into the sea, which deepened the local conviction that the mages were responsible. The current Jarl of Winterhold, Corir, barely tolerates the college's presence. The irony is that the college is probably the best thing about Winterhold economically at this point, given that the rest of the city is barely functional. But the resentment is older than the logic, and resentments tend to outlast the facts that might complicate them. The Sleeping Giant Inn in Riverwood, where Delphine is hiding, was purchased by her specifically as a cover identity. She has been in Riverwood long enough to be a known figure, an ordinary innkeeper as far as anyone can tell. Her actual nature, as one of the last surviving Blades, is concealed behind years of mundane behavior. The attic room she maintains is her actual living space and operational base, concealed behind a wardrobe that only opens to specific guests. The length of time she has maintained this cover reflects both how long the Thalmor have been hunting the Blades and how completely the organization was dismantled. She has been hiding in plain sight in a small village, running an inn, for long enough that the role no longer feels like a role. This is what survival looks like across decades rather than months. The companion's relationship with the Skyrim Civil War is a deliberate institutional choice rather than a practical limitation. They have the warriors to get involved. Several of their members clearly have personal views on the conflict, but the organization's official neutrality is enforced because it is the thing that has allowed them to exist across political changes that have destroyed other institutions. When governments change, when empires rise and fall, organizations that tied themselves to a specific political outcome tend to be purged by whoever wins. The Companions have survived by refusing to participate in politics as an institution. Their members can fight in the war as individuals. The Companions, as an organization, will take contracts from either side without preference or loyalty. The skill system in Skyrim, where practicing a skill improves it, extends to things that players do without thinking of as training. Every lock you pick makes you slightly better at picking locks. Every person you persuade makes you marginally more skilled at persuasion. Every merchant you trade with develops your mercantile sense. The game's mechanics are built around the idea that doing things is how you get better at them, which is both true as a learning philosophy and creates the amusing phenomenon of a warrior becoming an expert blacksmith by crafting daggers for hours in a forge, or a mage becoming a master of light armor by wearing it through enough combat. The skill system treats all activity as practice, and all practice as meaningful, which produces some characters of deeply unusual configuration. The final fact worth carrying into the night is this. Skyrim shipped in 2011 with an in-game library of 337 books, totaling 316,000 words, a dragon language with a working grammar and 34 runic characters, more than 300 individually named NPCs, each with their own daily schedules, hundreds of locations each, hand-placed and hand-detailed, and a world that has continued generating new secrets and discoveries for more than a decade since its release. People are still finding things, still making connections the developers built in and then waited to see if anyone would notice. Still walking through the ruins of the Dwemer and sitting with the quiet of what was lost there. The care that went into making that world is evident in the world. Not everything works perfectly, not every thread pulls through cleanly, but the love for it is there, in every book nobody needs to have written, in every NPC with a story that has nothing to do with any quest, in every piece of environmental storytelling that only appears if you stop running and look carefully at the corner of a room that nobody designed to be noticed. That is a particular kind of making, a generous, maybe even slightly reckless kind, building more than anyone will ever fully see, and trusting that the excess, the richness that goes beyond what any single player will experience, is what makes the world feel real. As though it goes on around the edges of your attention whether you are looking or not. It does go on. The wind moves through Whiterun. The Greybeards sit in silence at the top of the world. The Draugr stir in the dark of the ancient tombs. And somewhere out there, in the cold mountains of a world that was made with love, an old dragon keeps meditating on what it costs and what it means to choose to be different from what you were born as. He is still at it. He has time. If you made it all the way here, through all of that, thank you, genuinely. Drop a comment and tell me which fact hit differently, which one you are going to look up yourself, or just where in the world you are listening from right now. Subscribe if you want to do this again. There are other worlds worth visiting in the quiet of the night, and I would love to take you there. Until then, rest well, cozy knights. Lower your swords. The night is still, and you are safe.